Welcome. Welcome everybody to the third Local and Regional Governments Forum on the 2030 Agenda. This is a special event within the High Level Political Forum. It is the third edition of this forum, and it is co-organized by the UN family, UN-DESA, UNDP, UN Habitat, and the Global Taskforce. And the Global Taskforce of Local and Regional Governments is a coordination and consultation mechanism of local and regional government networks. Over 24 networks are gathered in that platform, and I am very pleased that my organization, United Cities and Local Governments, is facilitating that work on behalf of all of us. We are also very proud to co-organize this event with Local 2030, another very interesting initiative that has been promoting local action for the SDGs. This Local and Regional Governments Forum is going to be focusing on the decade of action and bolstering change from the ground up. We are trying to share through the experiences of local and regional governments, but also of other stakeholders, national governments, civil society, and UN agencies, the action that is being taken at local level, at territories level, through experiences, but also the concerns and the visions of those spheres of government. So without further ado, I would like to start introducing the impressive panel that we have for the opening ceremony. Allow me to give the floor to Mr. Liu Zhenmin, Undersecretary General for Economic and Social Affairs of the United Nations. Mr. Liu, it is a great pleasure for us to have you with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Amila and Emily, for moderating this session. Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the 2020 Local and Regional Governments Forum. This year's Local and Regional Governments Forum, organized in connection with the high-level political forum, is taking place at an extremely challenging time. The world is now facing a global crisis, unlike any other in the 75 years of history of the United Nations. The COVID-19 pandemic is a human crisis, one that is attacking societies at their level, at their core. Around the world, local and regional governments are at the forefront, dealing with the escalating social and economic effects of the pandemic. The severity of the impacts of this pandemic will depend on whether the recovery is gradual or rapid, and whether we return to the pre-pandemic world or to one that is more sustainable and equitable. The initial assessments are sobering. There is enormous loss of lives and livelihoods, and a deepening poverty and hunger. Global GDP is expected to contract sharply in 2020. Estimates range from 3.2% to 5.2%, potentially the largest contraction in economic activity since the Great Depression in the 1930s, and far worse than the 2008 and 2009 global financial crisis. One thing is clear, however, if responses are ad hoc, unfunded, and without a view to long-term goals, the consequences of COVID-19 will be deep and long-lasting. We may risk reversing decades of progress towards sustainable development. Ladies and gentlemen, while the anticipated outcomes of the COVID-19 pandemic are dire, they can be averted by actions taken now at all levels of governance. As societies around the world begin to move towards recovery, three priorities, in particular, will enable the world to build back better in a unified way. First, we need to ensure there's no backsliding on the progress already made on SDGs. This may endanger not only the prospects for sustainable development, it would also reduce resilience to other shocks in the future, especially for the most vulnerable. Second, we need to accelerate the universal provision of quality essential services, guaranteed universal access to services that provide quality healthcare, education, water, sanitation, clean energy, and internet must become an integral part of the recovery from the COVID-19 crisis. Third, we need to urgently reverse course on the degradation of nature. Unlike the sudden onset of the pandemic, the twin crises of climate change and biodiversity loss have built up more slowly. The pandemic itself reveals the size of the challenge, but also offers a chance to observe, even if for a short time, the possibility of being able to reverse the degradation of nature. Distinguished participants, at the SDG Summit in September 2019, member states reaffirmed that cities, local authorities, and communities could play a critical role in implementing and realizing SDGs. And they committed to empowering and supporting them in pursuing the 2030 agenda. Today, we are very happy to have with us a mix of distinguished mayors and governors, national government representatives, academics, representatives of the United Nations system and other international organizations, and members of the private sector and civil society. Today, more than ever, we need not only a whole of government approach, but the commitment of all actors to take action on SDGs. In the lead up to 2019 SDG Summit, my department, UN-DESA, set up an online knowledge platform to galvanize and capture ambitious SDG acceleration actions undertaken by governments and all other non-state actors. As of today, over 170 bold, game-changing commitments and initiatives aimed at advancing the decade of action to deliver SDGs have been published. Building on many approaches, these SDG acceleration actions reflect diverse country and sectoral realities, as well as regional perspectives. I invite you all to be inspired by the actions that have already been registered. Please visit the platform to register and share your own efforts to implement the SDGs. Let us leverage our collective power to deliver on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. I wish you a successful event. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. You are not hearing the applause, but it is being given to you anyway. Thank you very much, Undersecretary General, for these words. It's really good to see how much online we are. Our constituency of local and regional governments, we launched our annual report on localization of the Sustainable Development Goals last Friday, and many of the issues that you have recalled around service provision and financing are very clear recommendations coming out of that report. Thank you so much for this intervention. I am going now to Ms. Maimunah Sharif, Undersecretary General and Executive Director of UN Habitat. Maimunah, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Emilia. Excellencies, honorable mayors, partners and friends, ladies and gentlemen. A very good morning, afternoon, evening to all of you, wherever you are in this world. You are most welcome to this program. It is my great honor and immense pleasure that I join you to open this third high-level local and regional government forum today. Of course, we are very glad, despite the challenges the whole world is being confronted with, we are able to connect to discuss the important issues around local action and recovery from the COVID-19 crisis. I wish to thank you all, dear friends, for a remarkable effort made in fighting this pandemic, and for your courage, for your leadership, and for the innovative actions developed. Local and regional governments from around the globe are an inspiration for all of us, and I am glad and grateful to see you joining this important forum in large numbers at the ministers level and also at the local level and the mayors. Nevertheless, local governments alone cannot win the battle against the pandemic. We need multilateral cooperation if we want a sustainable future. This is why I am delighted to see representatives of member states, the private sector and civil society also virtually gathered today, a demonstration that intersectoral and multi-level partnerships are more critical than ever. 3 years ago, the first high-level local and regional government forum took place during the High-Level Political Forum 2018 to discuss the key role and mission of local governments in localizing the 2030 agenda. 3 years after that first convening, that role has been explicitly acknowledged by national governments and international organizations, and thanks to the tireless work of the local governments network and association and all of you. UN Habitat has proudly supported the organization of this forum since its very beginning, and you can count on us for the additions to come. Let me take a moment to especially thank the Global Taskforce for the local and regional government, and in which UN Habitat interacts daily and has proven to be a solid, reliable, and efficient mechanism of coordination between local government and international organizations. This third edition of the forum comes at a very appropriate time. After the first wave of COVID-19, countries are now rethinking and replanning our way of living. But the fight is not over yet. The possibility of a second and third wave is real. We all need to be prepared and to learn from the good work that has been done. So the COVID-19 pandemic has shown the best and the worst of our world and societies. Solidarity, innovative partnership, and creativity have characterized the response to the health crisis. Nevertheless, the chronic and structural inequalities rooted in our society were exposed as the virus and its social and economic consequences hit the most vulnerable and marginalized the hardest. Local and regional governments have been and are at the forefront of the fight against the virus, designing and testing innovative policies and initiatives to protect citizens and communities. Now, those same governments need our support to ensure a healthy, equitable, and sustainable world. Partners, friends, every crisis also brings an opportunity in its wake. This is the opportunity for us to transform, to build back better, to build back greener, to leapfrog into a sustainable, inclusive, and resilient future for all. This crisis can be and must be the turning point in the pursuit of our common goal. So this transformation needs to start from the bottom up. Local and regional government, as at the level closest to the citizen, have a clear and complete understanding of the needs and priorities of their communities. We all know where than ever now, and more than ever now also, that Agenda 2030 and SDGs will never be achieved without full engagement of local and regional governments. All the SDGs, as well as the new urban agenda, have targets that are directly or indirectly related to the daily work of the local and regional governments. They should therefore not be seen as passive actors and mere implementers of this agenda, but as a key drivers from which the success of the global goals will depend, especially in the aftermath of the pandemic. Local and regional governments have unique legitimacy to bring together all sectors and interests in their communities. They can raise awareness and gather citizens to develop and act for a shared vision for a sustainable future. And although they forge partnership at the national and international level, facilitating scale-up of best practices and exchange of cutting-edge knowledge among territories. They are the catalysts of innovation, pioneers in designing and testing new policies and initiatives to deliver better services and improve the living standard of their communities. This is what local and regional governments are, the key players from which our sustainable future will depend. So in light of this consideration, I would like to reiterate UN Habitat's commitment to strengthen our long-standing partnership with the Global Taskforce of local regional government, even since when I was a mayor in Penang, Amelia, to support the post-pandemic recovery as well as the achievement of the SDG and the new urban agenda. So dear partners, dear friends, let's keep working together, strengthen our alliance to make this world a better place for all. Let us not forget our pledge that we made of our decade of action and our declared action at 10 World Urban Forum in Abu Dhabi the last February. You can count on our trust, support, and engagement. I'm sure I can also count on yours. So I wish you inspiring and fruitful discussion and great third session of the Local and Regional Government Forum online. Thank you very much, Emilia. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Undersecretary General and Executive Director. Always a pleasure. We were saying it before, this is a whole of government and whole of society effort that we need to undertake together, and certainly you can count on the networks gathered at the Global Task Force to continue those efforts. I'm going now to Mr. Mahmoud Mohieldin, a Special Envoy of the Secretary General on financing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, a very important topic, a well-known friend to all of us. Mahmoud, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Emilia, for this kind introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all. It's a great pleasure and honor for me to participate in this panel with the distinguished speakers. And before I get into the substance of my brief talking points, I just like to recognize their contribution to the topic today. In preparing for today's comments, I went through some of the recent knowledge products of the representatives of their organizations today, and I'd like to share that with you for the importance of this work for policy implications and policy advice. Before we started, I had this brief chat with Mr. Liu Zhenmin, and I congratulated him and his team for the publication of a very important report on e-government. And I was exceptionally happy to see that in this year, there was a focus on local e-government development in their extensive survey. And as they emphasized, local e-government merits attention because city and municipal administrations have more direct interaction with residents, especially during this challenging time of COVID-19, and are responsible for addressing concerns affecting people's daily lives. We have seen their index about access and about the fact as well that only 14 out of the surveyed 100 cities have very high local online service indices. The others do vary, but the majority are in the middle to the low segments of access, which makes us aware of the importance of the investment of the new DNA, data, networks, and using artificial intelligence to enhance the capacity of cities. This is the new DNA. It has been important since we have been talking about the importance of technology, but with COVID-19, have seen the importance of modernizing the capacity of cities to enable them to do a better job in the work. And the Undersecretary General, Madam Sharif, Madam Maimunah Sharif, again, the work on cities and urban development, this is the core business of UN-Habitat. And in addition to these three important reminders of the recent work about the work of the cities and mayors, municipalities in the emergency phase, in the response to COVID-19, on the early recovery phase, and indeed in trying to pursue what's so-called the new normal with all uncertainties around the future of work. Will cities residents will want to live in the same densely populated areas? What can we be doing about that? The future of the transit services and mobility, issues related to localizing the supply chains after all of these challenges we have seen at the beginning of the crisis, and again, digital infrastructure. I know that colleagues from UNDP are joining us, and again, it's another reminder of an important work that came out about inequality in the 21st century and the fact that the new form of inequalities is centered around issues related to access or no access to mobile and digital solution. This is the digital era. In addition to the important work you are undertaking at your municipal level, it's basically how to be connected, how to be with access, how to provide services is essential today to the new world and the opportunities for the people and the growing populations, especially the young. And finally, I'm very pleased and honored to join this panel with His Excellency Dr. Muhammad Boudra, the mayor of Al Hoceima, the president of the Moroccan Association of Mayors, and the president of the United Cities and Local Governments. We have one thing in common, not just we are coming from the same neighborhood, but one of the great leaders of the Arab world who fought for life, for freedom and dignity, was born in his city and was buried with the martyrs in my own city, Muhammad Abdul Karim al-Khattabi, a legendary activist for the good. Having said that, and linking the whole work then to what we are trying to do, reminders of what the Secretary General have been emphasizing from the very beginning in his policy brief on socioeconomic measures, that it is not enough to talk global, it is not enough to talk national. It's very much important to internalize the factors related to the local communities and the regional networks, which have been handled effectively by this group and by the good work of the UCLG as well. Preparedness, infrastructure, and human capital capabilities, access to emergency funds, and coordination and communication flows with central governments. This is the day-to-day kind of issues of concern and work of the leaders of their communities. I've been reminded again that while the work of government is important, the work of efficient markets is adequately important, but ignoring communities is responsible for lots of the challenges we are facing today, including inequality, persistent inequality. As been shared before me, that we can see that the local government's response to pandemic may cover 6 broad areas: increasing the capacity of local healthcare systems, promoting community awareness and mobilization, enhancing social protection measures, enforcing public order and regulations, and of course, ensuring the continued provision of essential services, including water, sewage, garbage collection, and utility services, and contributing to the relief measures for local economies. And again, the issue about localization of production and being part of the global value chain cannot be overemphasized. When it comes to the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, local governments and municipalities are also at the forefront. And the figures speak loudly about the fact that since 1950, the world's urban population has risen almost sixfold, from 750 million to around 4.2 billion in 2018, and marching towards a 6 billion figure by 2050. What's striking, really, that despite these kind of increases of responsibilities, the resources, financial and human resources and capacity didn't really change much despite the efforts, and cities and municipalities are still very much constrained. We have seen a recent report by the UN Capital Development Fund reminding us that in many developing countries, the share of own source revenues is less than 10% of the total local government budgets. Intergovernmental transfers and grants remain as major source of local government, but between 70 and 80% of these transfers come as non-discretionary grants earmarked already for particular sector activities, which is limiting the capacity of the municipalities and community to choose their priorities as they wish. And even that small figure of the 10% or any kind of resource that was mobilized by the local authorities had been under pressure and compromised because of the COVID-19 crisis. Social distancing and working from home made many of the activities less than they were before. Taxes, revenue, rents, and other receivables have been under huge pressure, and that needs really to be dealt with through the support of governments, central governments, and we have seen some very good attempts in dealing with this issues, but even central governments are very much constrained. That needs really some sort of innovative ways of dealing with these kind of budget constraints through better public-private partnerships going forward. I'd like to just to include by emphasizing the following, that to tackle the enormous challenges facing cities and municipalities today, we need a multifaceted approach that includes coordinated regional planning with strong rural-urban linkages, effective land use. Still, land management and land use could be utilized better for the benefit of the people of the communities and municipalities. I suggested as well the innovation and financing mechanisms. We have seen new products directed to green finance of cities and municipalities. In addition to improving the resilience of services and their delivery models and linking them to finance, sustaining the capacity building through investment in human capital, and finally, the adoption of appropriate smart and green growth strategies. While we talk about global goals, but their effective implementation, they start and end at the capacity of local communities and municipalities. And for local government to succeed in playing the role as catalyzers of sustainability, they urgently need to support their capacities, especially in public finance, planning and management, to build infrastructure and enhance services in good collaborative way with their communities. And I'm happy that this event today is tackling many of these big fundamental questions. And I hope that the work on the finance, in debt management, and including more the private sector in the solutions can provide the warranted needs for support going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Special Envoy. Wise words and big concerns for us. I think we look forward to continuing this conversation with you. And many of the issues that you have mentioned are also included in the recommendations of our joint statement as constituency to the high-level political forum. So very happy to continue this conversation. I'm going now to Dr. Mohamed Boudra, indeed the mayor of Al Hoceima and president of the Moroccan Association of Mayors, also president of United Cities and Local Governments. President, the floor is yours.
Merci, chère Emilia. Merci, mon ami Mahmoud Mohieldin. Votre Excellence, Président de l'Assemblée générale, distingués ministres et membres des gouvernements nationaux, chers maires et membres de la société civile, chers collègues, un grand bonjour de la ville d'Al Hoceima, du Royaume du Maroc, de l'Afrique. Permettez-moi tout d'abord de vous souhaiter la bienvenue à cette 3e édition du Forum des gouvernements locaux et régionaux dans le cadre du Forum politique de haut niveau. Permettez-moi de remercier les co-organisateurs, le secrétaire général adjoint aux affaires économiques et sociales, M. Liu Zhenmin, et le secrétaire général adjoint et directeur d'ONU Habitat, notre cher Maimunah Mohamed Sharif, et d'exprimer ma satisfaction de pouvoir amener à un moment aussi délicat la voix des gouvernements locaux et régionaux à la table de décision mondiale. Nous ne pouvons pas sous-estimer l'importance de se réunir aujourd'hui dans le cadre du 3e Forum des gouvernements locaux et régionaux à un moment de crise sans précédent où nos communautés ont plus que jamais besoin de leurs représentants, de leurs élus. Nous avons un double objectif, discuter de la manière dont nous devons nous relever et ce que pour toutes les sphères de gouvernement et veiller à ce que le retour à la normale tient compte de nos objectifs de développement commun territoriaux. Les gouvernements locaux et régionaux, le collectif auquel j'appartiens, a été et continue d'être à l'avant-garde dans la lutte contre les multiples facettes de la crise, garantissant des services publics qui ont été un élément clé dans lequel la réponse sanitaire a été soutenue. Mais, et c'est l'une des raisons de ce forum, les urgences ne peuvent nous faire oublier ce qui est le plus important. Ce qui est le plus important, ce sont les racines de la crise, les faiblesses de nos systèmes, les inégalités. Nous connaissons bien les causes et nous les avons énoncées. En effet, les 17 objectifs de développement durable doivent être la priorité de la phase qui s'annonce. Un an après, nous sommes ici, avec plus de force et avec encore plus de détermination, virtuellement, mais ensemble. La lutte contre le virus est devenue une lutte contre la pauvreté et les inégalités structurelles, en particulier au niveau local, qui ont été exacerbées par le virus. Et la prestation de services publics a été le barrage pour contenir ces inégalités croissantes. C'est pourquoi les gouvernements locaux et régionaux doivent être en dialogue permanent sur la manière de les financer, relançant un débat qui aurait dû avoir lieu il y a longtemps. Parler d'action locale et d'appropriation des communautés sans service de base adéquat est une anomalie. C'est notre message clé à ce forum de haut niveau. L'accès des populations à un logement convenable, à l'eau, à l'assainissement, à l'éducation, au système alimentaire, à la mobilité et à la santé est une condition sine qua non. Nous avons maintenant des preuves empiriques de son importance et de l'interdépendance du système. Il est important que les plans nationaux de développement et de relance intègrent des plans de localisation des agendas autour des services publics de base et l'action locale des communautés. Les sacrifices de nos communautés ne peuvent passer inaperçus. Notre résilience après la crise et la durabilité de la planète sont en jeu pour la décennie d'action. Cette crise doit être l'occasion d'accélérer l'appropriation de l'agenda 2030 dans nos communautés en adoptant ce nouveau contrat social pour mieux reconstruire. Les tables rondes et dialogues entre toutes les sphères du gouvernement et tous les acteurs seront des instruments essentiels dans les années à venir. Les gouvernements locaux sont prêts à co-créer un cadre de gouvernance. Nous sommes prêts à être consultés et à offrir nos propres expériences de localisation sous la forme de nos rapports locaux et infranationaux volontaires. Je vous invite à lire notre rapport annuel de localisation qui a été publié vendredi dernier et qui donne un bon aperçu de ce qui est fait, mais aussi de ce qui reste à faire. Je voudrais terminer en partageant la vision du secrétaire général des Nations Unies sur l'importance de construire et reconstruire un monde de solidarité. Les gouvernements locaux et régionaux du monde entier ont fait de la solidarité leur vitrine pendant cette crise. Et nous sommes convaincus que le monde qui émerge après le Covid doit aussi le faire. Le nouveau multilatéralisme ou CGLU doit avoir un statut reconnu au niveau des Nations Unies. Ce nouveau multilatéralisme doit être renforcé après la pandémie et doit être basé sur la solidarité et sur le principe de subsidiarité et doit prendre en compte tous les acteurs et les communautés les plus vulnérables. En cette année de commémoration du 75e anniversaire des Nations Unies, nous offrons notre soutien pour repenser ce multilatéralisme. Nous le faisons par l'espoir de générations qui viennent après nous et que nous représentons également. Excellences, chers ministres, chers collègues, depuis le collectif des gouvernements locaux et régionaux réunis dans les réseaux représentés ici aujourd'hui, nous vous offrons notre engagement, notre coopération et la créativité de nos communautés. Nous sommes prêts à contribuer et à façonner ensemble le monde dans cette décennie d'action. Vous pouvez compter sur nous et merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, President. Thank you to all the speakers for these opening remarks. We are going now to the next session of our forum. There will be three sessions, one dedicated to delivering universal basic services, one that will be dedicated to multi-level governance, and one building back better. And then we have a closing session with the President of the General Assembly. So I will go now to my colleague, Raf Toots, Director of Global Solutions Division of UN Habitat. Raf, a very interesting panel you've got ahead. Good luck with it. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Emilia. Thanks for the introduction. Indeed, we have a panel with 6 speakers hailing from different parts of the local and regional government spectrum. And I'm going to introduce them before they speak. I'm going to introduce an initial question for each of them. And then if we have time at the end, we can come back to the panelists for further questions. The topic indeed is delivering universal basic services, and this is one of the key targets of the Sustainable Development Goals and the Decade of Action, but also something that has been very much challenged throughout the pandemic. We are looking at housing, water and sanitation, public transport, solid waste, local economy, education and health, all important services, public services, basic services where local and regional governments play a role that have been under strain. So I'm going to ask the 6 panelists to give their views on this topic, starting with Mr. Magnus Bendtsson, the President of the Assembly of European Regions and also Vice President of the Regional Council of Västra Götaland and Regional Minister of Environment. So Mr. Magnus Bendtsson, the COVID pandemic has highlighted and taught us the critical importance of territorial partnerships, particularly when it comes to the efficient delivery of public services. As President of the Assembly of European Regions, and Vice President of a regional council, in your opinion, how can local and regional governments collaborate in delivering basic services across borders? And how can we ensure that the standards in efficiency and quality are maintained, taking into consideration how territories were differently impacted by the pandemic? Over to you, Mr. Magnus.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your question and thank you for the floor. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers, the UN-DESA, UN Habitat and Local 2030 and UNDP, as well as the Global Taskforce of Local and Regional Governments for making this gathering possible, despite the current circumstances that prevented us from sharing the same room on such an important day. I'm very honored to be here today to represent the local and regional governments, and I'm pleased to do that as President of the Assembly of European Regions and Regional Minister for Environmental and being a Vice President of the Regional Council of Västra Götaland in Sweden. Unfortunately, not every single region or municipality can make their voice heard here today, but I will try to do my best to represent each of you. The world has been put to the test during the past several months, a test of which none of us was prepared for. Local and regional governments found themselves at the forefront of the health crisis, having to coordinate a quick response to protect their citizens and their economy from the pandemic. Some months have passed since the COVID-19 established our health systems, and most regional and local governments have been able to take quick action in responding to the pandemic through universal public service delivery. Indeed, housing played a fundamental role in our fight against COVID-19, allowing social distancing and hygiene, two key elements to stop the further spread of the virus. However, while some of us are recovering and making progress against the pandemic, others, the poorest and the most vulnerable ones, the ones that have not been granted access to basic services, are still suffering the most from the crisis. We, the local and regional governments, should take responsibility for the provision of basic services to our citizens in order to improve their living standards and their quality of life. Basic social services are part of the fundamental human rights, and no one is better placed than us to understand and respond to the needs of the most vulnerable. And therefore, we should play a key role in ensuring that no one is left behind. Speaking from my region, Västra Götaland in Sweden, we intend to organize and structure our work, both healthcare and regional development, in relations to the Agenda 2030, illustrated by our process of reviewing our environmental and social sustainability goals for 2030. The structure, preparation process, and intended implementation of these have been processed and harmonized together. And the purpose is that proposal for environmental goals and goals for social sustainability should strengthen each other and be seen as the whole Västra Götaland region's implementation of the ecological and social dimension of the Agenda 2030. This process also result in avoiding of possible goal conflicts, illustrating that 17 goals together contribute to an ecological, social, and economical, sustainable world, and together they form a puzzle that all the pieces are needed to be included. Exemplified, the Agenda 30 goals, 3 of them have been prioritized in Västra Götaland in our environmental perspective. Sustainable consumption and production, goal 12, combating climate changes, Goal 13, and ecosystem and biodiversity, Goal 15. All these three are corresponding to our environmental goals for 2030. By working with these three goals, however, we still need to, the goals still need to be promoted. For example, good healthcare and well-being are promoted by combating climate change, strengthening ecosystem service by creating a non-toxic environment. Access to recent report, according to the recent report from the UN Economic and Social Council, half of the world's population do not benefit from any form of social protections, nor have access to essential health service. Food insecurity has been on the rise since 2015, and due to the pandemic, the figures have been inaccessible. Our health system have been devastated amid COVID-19, which has revealed that insufficient healthcare facilities and medical supplies. Children's education has been put on hold in many places during the lockdown, affecting over 50% of the population in that area. So today I call all member states, regions and cities and civil society organizations to coordinate efforts to order to establish a fair future for all and a resilient regions and cities to guarantee the quality living standards that each city of the world deserves. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Magnus Benson, with your remarks highlighting the importance of housing, also picturing the puzzle of SDGs where all pieces have to come together, including some of the important environmental targets. Let's now move to the second speaker of this panel on delivering universal basic services, Mr. Abdesalamat Sekal, the president of the Rabat Saleh Kenitra Regional Council, and also the president of Oru Fogar. Mr. Sakal, you have the floor, please.
Merci, monsieur.
Sorry,
Donc, c'est un plaisir pour moi d'être avec vous en tant que président de la région de Rabat Saleh Kenitra et de l'Oru Fogar. Ma participation, donc, tout d'abord, il est lieu de constater qu'entre 2015 et 2016, la communauté internationale a adopté 3 agendas novateurs et ambitieux. L'agenda 2030, l'accord de Paris sur les changements climatiques et le nouvel agenda urbain. Le rôle central des collectivités territoriales dans la mise en œuvre de ces 3 agendas est aujourd'hui acté et reconnu, compte tenu notamment de leurs prérogatives en matière de promotion de développement territorial durable et intégré. Les dynamiques d'échange et de partage qui ont prévalu jusqu'à maintenant à l'échelle mondiale, notamment sur les ODD, montrent à quel point il est important, tout en actant du contexte globalisé du développement, de reconnaître que c'est aux territoires et en particulier les régions qu'il appartient de promouvoir une mondialisation équitable, inclusive et durable. La dimension globale et intégrée du développement territorial impose de penser la mise en œuvre du nouvel agenda urbain et des ODD dans une vision prospective et de traduire cette vision en actions concrètes ayant des impacts directs et positifs sur les populations en donnant un contenu effectif et opérationnel au principe de subsidiarité et en assurant une proximité et une participation des citoyens au processus de prise de décision. La durabilité des territoires place inévitablement la région comme cadre idéal pour concevoir, dans une vision globale et intégrée, les lignes majeures de la stratégie de développement durable et de définir avec précision les chantiers de concertation avec les collectivités des échelles inférieures, les acteurs non étatiques, les opérateurs économiques et les citoyens. Il s'agit d'un réel défi de gouvernance qui se décline dans des termes encore plus accentués dans les régions et territoires des pays du Sud, où le processus de décentralisation n'est pas entièrement accompli, butant encore sur les mécanismes de transfert effectif des compétences et sur les limites des ressources financières et humaines qualifiées. Ces plusieurs avancées ont été accomplies à ce sujet. Il est certain qu'un événement inédit que celui de la crise sanitaire que nous vivons actuellement va engendrer un ralentissement général des différents processus lancés. De par son ampleur et ses répercussions imprévisibles, cette crise risque de bousculer les ordres établis et d'altérer de manière préjudiciable la confiance dans le multilatéralisme et ses institutions. Le discours accompagnant la montée en puissance d'un processus de centralisation plus ou moins autoritaire dans la gestion des effets de cette crise ne doit en aucun cas prévaloir, sachant que la réalité montre que les pays qui ont le mieux réussi à endiguer la crise sont des États démocratiques où les différents niveaux de gouvernance coopèrent en toute complémentarité. L'efficacité de la réponse à l'urgence du Covid-19 ou toute autre crise dépend largement du niveau d'articulation entre les différents acteurs territoriaux et les différents niveaux de gouvernance, ainsi que de la participation élargie et active de la société civile et des citoyens. L'appropriation des ODD dans ce contexte de crise vaut aussi bien par les implications méthodologiques que leur mise en œuvre par les territoires impose, que par les indicateurs qui permettent de mesurer le niveau de leur atteinte. La prise en compte de ce double défi impose de 1. Matérialiser une planification stratégique intégrée dans la vision nationale proche de la réalité et axée sur les résultats quantifiables. Mobiliser les capacités managériales et techniques permettant d'asseoir les bases de cette planification stratégique et le suivi de ces objectifs, asseoir des partenariats entre régions ainsi qu'avec le secteur privé en vue de mobiliser les financements nécessaires à la mise en œuvre des différentes politiques. Faire de la participation citoyenne un moteur de réussite des politiques publiques, développer et mener des programmes de développement durable, intégrés, territorialisés, axés sur l'humain. Tous ces changements ne peuvent se faire que dans le cadre d'une complémentarité exemplaire entre les différents niveaux de gouvernance, notamment le niveau intermédiaire. C'est là l'une des missions principales et c'est l'un des objectifs principaux de l'action de notre réseau, le réseau de l'Orefogard. Je vous remercie, mesdames, messieurs, pour bien écouter mon intervention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sekal, for highlighting the importance of governance systems and also the subsidiarity between different levels of government and the importance of working with private sector, between regions and private sector, and capacitating also lower levels of government to make sure that the government systems are delivering during this period of crisis. I would like to move forward now to the third speaker, who is Ms. Rohi Malik Low, the mayor of Banjul, Gambia. Ms. Low, I would like to ask you the following question. African countries and territories have been hit hard by the pandemic and by its sanitary, social, and economic consequences. In your role as mayor of Banjul, which have been the main challenges in facing the pandemic, and which could be the role of universal public services delivery in supporting a sustainable and inclusive recovery from the COVID-19 crisis in Banjul, but also in other African countries? You have the floor, madam.
Hello, Mr. Chairman, am I in?
Yes, please.
Okay. Now I said, let me first and foremost thank our UCLG family through our dear Secretary General, Emilia Sachs. I think the question that you asked has all to do with localizing the SDGs. Because when you ask the problem that we are facing right now during the COVID-19, let me bring it in the context of my city, Banjul. Mr. Chairperson, I want to say that during the the time of the COVID-19, or let me say during this time of the COVID-19, the main problems that my city is facing mostly is about revenue collection. This is the main problem that we are facing right now, and also a massive sensitization. Sensitization is also a problem because since the beginning of the COVID-19, it's like in Africa, people cannot just believe that COVID-19 is something real. So therefore, we're having a lot of problems when we talk about the COVID. So right now, if you look at my country, not only my city, but my country, if you look at if you send pictures here in the forum, you can see that people has easily forgotten that COVID-19 is in the making. We are right now having a lot of cases. Our cases are almost multiplying from one number to 4, 5, and 6 every day. So when we talk about localizing the SDGs, as a mayor and the first female elected mayor in the Gambia, and by extension the capital, as I just said, this is a topic very, very dear to my heart. And Mr. Chairperson, the city, my city, is densely populated with women and youths. And therefore, when we talk about the problem of the pandemic, it means the capital, is suffering more than any other municipality. We have problems of policies, I will say, because we have what we call the state of emergency here in the Gambia, when people are really, really not sticking to the protocols of the WHO and the protocols that is given by the ministry. So, and I will just add by saying that the political will is not there, because everybody is doing whatever they want. And there is nothing like a law which is saying, if you do that, we will do this. Of course, there is a law there, but it's really, really not implemented. So for the COVID-19, to at least to help the people in my city, I think the first important thing to happen is for us to as a politician, the political will should be there. And this is why also that the SDGs are not working the way that we want it to work in, I wouldn't say in Africa, but in Gambia. Because it's the most important thing is to try by localizing it to filter down the importance of the SDGs to the community. The community should first and foremost be sensitized. They should understand that the SDGs are something very, very important, and this should be respected, and they should be consumed by the community, so that we will have a result. Mr. Chairperson, I will end by telling you that the impact that the COVID-19 has in my city is overwhelming. Financially, we lag behind. Mobility is also a problem at the moment, because most of the drivers are not coming out to work, simply because there's a policy which says 3 passengers in a car, when in reality they're supposed to have 36 passengers, and they are not like subvented. Nothing is given to the drivers so that they can abide by the laws. If we talk about education, people have to do, students are at home, and most of them don't have the gadgets that they should use to stay at home and do their works. So education is hardly affected, is hit hard by the COVID, and governance also, because at this moment, I cannot even do my council meetings, simply because the councillors don't have computers and they cannot do anything on a distance. So therefore, in all areas, Mr. Chairperson, we are affected by the COVID-19. We have learned from it, and I think the way forward will be something that will be very, very important for us to learn from good practices as we are doing now in this platform. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Honorable Mayor, with your remarks, with an overwhelming situation, with challenges in revenue collection, but also in mobility, in governance, in education, and the need for very aggressive sensitization to abide by this, the solutions that are would enable us to come out of this crisis, but also to achieve the SDGs in the same vein. Let's now move to the fourth speaker, who is Reverend Mfo Moruagomo. He's the chair of the Commonwealth Local Government Forum. Mr. Moruagomo, you're the chair of the CLGF, and across many parts of the Commonwealth, especially in Africa and South Asia, the communities are struggling, especially those living in informal settlements where public services don't reach. How can these cities in the Commonwealth recover from the pandemic, and how can universal public services help in support of this recovery process? You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. To all of you, my colleagues, Your Excellencies, the Undersecretaries of the United Nations and Special Envoys, Mr. Zanim, Madam Sharif, and Mr. Mohieldin, Mr. Budra, the President of the World Collective of Local and Regional Governments, and your Secretary General, Madam Amelia Sias, Honorable Ministers, Mayors, colleagues, indeed, as already has been indicated, this pandemic has posed a great challenge to the work of local and regional governments. A few weeks ago, CLGF has held a number of seminars on members' experiences dealing with this pandemic. The content of these sessions was very rich and challenging and revealed a lot of challenges, good practices, and examples from these regional and local and regional governments. But above all, this has shown the solidarity and the capacity that has emanated from these local governments despite the challenges of resources. As indicated earlier, Mr. Moderator, Chairman, 30 to 65% has been revealed in our area CLGF, that 65% of local government and regional governments revenues, income could not come in out of rates and other property taxes, as well as other license fees. Therefore, also the service delivery was stretched in the fact that we saw a pattern where most people were moving out of the cities back to their areas, therefore transferring the capacity, a strain in the capacity that was at local level, because they were migrating back from the cities, going back to rural areas. And this has placed a challenge on these, which means that the local and regional governments, together with all levels of governance, both regional and central governments, must then come together to ensure that we are able to look at this new normal of how to provide the services, given the challenges and the dictates of this decade of implementation of SDGs. This has taught us that we have to position ourselves to provide our citizenry with services, and therefore the need for decentralization in the new normal, the center of people's betterment and development, and ability to deal this is more lines with social and community mobilization that is underpinned by clear, robust decentralization mechanisms and processes, which are underpinned by a clear administrative and legal framework that gives legitimacy to local and regional governments. We have at this time to look at the fact that this pandemic has shed a light on the consumption models of many of our local governments or cities and the towns, which need to be looked at in the new light through proximity models of production. Sustainable proximity production models and local public service provisions will ensure that all have a livelihood and that no one and no place is left behind. In some areas, like if you take certain countries are dependent on imports and cross-border imports, trucking and transportation of goods has become a problem, which leads us to look at these new models of livelihoods for our people, including that as we move forward in this recovery period, we must also ensure that the imperative of local economic development becomes a key focus of the future interventions. And this needs to also support integration of formal and informal economies and ensure that the green recovery. Finally, let me say to all of us, we are at the cold face of all these as local and regional governments. And our work now is enormous and challenged. And some of mechanisms we have put in place and that we have the capacity we have built, we need to retweak it and enhance it to ensure that we can cope with the new normal. As CLGF, we stand ready to work together with every one of us, and I can say to all of us, so and social dialogue becomes key, Godspeed in all that we do.
Thank you so much, Reverend, for highlighting the challenges that you are seeing in your constituency, the revenue challenges, the governance challenges, the need for solidarity and working together to be ready for the new normal that the pandemic is demanding from us. Thank you so much. Let's now move to Mr. Osama Al-Azam. He's the General Manager of the Cities and Villages Development Bank. And he's also the Acting Secretary General for the Ministry of Local Administration of the Kingdom of Jordan. Mr. Al-Azam, though the Cities and Villages Development Bank and in your quality of also the Ministry of Local Administration, you have been engaged in strengthening Jordan municipalities in delivering sustainable development and basic services such as energy. How do you facilitate access to finance to respond to the pandemic challenges and in support of achievements of the SDGs? Which are the criteria used to allocate financial support? And are the sustainability and the SDGs taken into consideration? You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, good evening from Jordan. I want to start, to say that really, the easiest way to describe what Jordan did during the pandemic is that really, it was an effective response, but at a very high cost. Honestly, there was 3 stages to deal with the pandemic. It was started with adaptation, then solidarity, and then resilience and recovery. Coming back to your question, now whenever we talk about CVDB or Cities and Villages Development Bank, we deal with the municipalities, to support them financially and even, technically. We give technical support to them. How we allocate the fund to the municipalities, we deal with them, as you know, there is self-generated revenues for the municipalities, but at the same time, there is, in a country like Jordan, there is also government transfers. The government transfers has 3 parts, the 50% of the fuel tax and 40% of the tax of the car registration, and also the direct, which is tickets and fine tickets. Here, we have different way, or different factors to allocate this money. We said that also, I mean, like we have factors which is, I mean, like non-performance factor, which is, let's say, I mean, like the mayor and the city council has no role in it, like the size, the population, the distance from the capital, and other factors, I mean, like, and this is, I mean, like, distributed to all of them according to those factors, I mean, without being interfered. The other part, which is performance, the performance, we started last year by giving 5% to the performance of the city council and the municipality, and we are adding 5% every year, I mean, to reach to 40-60%. Now, I mean, like, whenever we come to what we did during the pandemic, there was at least two parts. I mean, as we know, I mean, like, the revenue is really, I mean, like, becomes much less. And we want to reduce the costs without affecting the services delivered to the citizens. So we started with focusing on energy efficiency and renewable energy. First, for energy efficiency, I mean, like, we are changing all the sodium lights in the streets, I mean, with an LED lamps. The tender is already passed, and I mean, like, it will be replaced in a year. And the other part, I mean, like, we started in cooperation with the donors, I mean, who are dealing with Jordan, also in having, I mean, like, solar farms to support the municipality, because honestly, I mean, like, we have two major expenditures in the municipalities in Jordan. One of them is the force work and the cost of them, and this is honestly, I mean, we are trying to reduce it by different means, and we reduce it now, I mean, like, from almost 80 to 85% of the budget to, we reach now to almost 46 to 47%, which was really, I mean, like, a good part. And the other part is the energy. And the energy, I mean, by first changing the lights, the street lights, and then just fixing, I mean, solar farms, it will be much better. The situation will be much better. The other part where we concentrate on also, I mean, like, is working, the digital transformation, where it will allow all the municipalities to work from home, especially, as you know, I mean, like, during the boycott and this, there was a lot of services that really, I mean, has been stopped according to that. So now we are working on just, I mean, like, expediting our plans, I mean, like, for digital transformation. At the same time, I mean, we are allowing the people to work from home at such a stage.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Osama Al-Azam, with your remarks. Again, focusing on the importance of the financing of the reaction and the response, and you have given an example of energy as a sector in which progress can be made during this time. Very good. Let's now move to the last speaker of this panel, and now we have a speaker representing Public Services International. It's Mr. David Boyce, the Deputy Secretary General of PSI. Mr. Boyce, the COVID-19 pandemic has put a strain on public services. Innovative public and private partnerships have emerged as a way to support public service delivery to a minimum level during lockdowns worldwide. From your perspective, what are and will be the most important long-term effects of the pandemic on public service delivery, and how can we transform the crisis into an opportunity to strengthen universal public services? You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Raf, and thanks to the hosts for inviting PSI, ministers, excellencies, friends in UCLG and in Habitat, all protocol respected. PSI is a global federation of trade unions operating in 160 countries and in countless cities. We represent 30 million working women and men, and we were founded in 1907. Our biggest sector is health, mainly women, underpaid, overstressed. With COVID, we see that most of them have really dangerous working conditions. They are risking their lives to save yours, to save ours, to save others. Our health members tell us they're not heroes, they're workers. And as such, they demand respect for their rights and dignity at work. They ask for the tools to do their jobs safely, professionally. Too many have been made sick or killed for lack of personal protective equipment. Let me say I agree with many of the statements made today. The effects of the pandemic on public service delivery, Raf, I think that we will be seeing new respect for strong, effective public services after 40 years of denigrating, of shrinking government and maligning public servants, of structural adjustment and austerity. I think also we're going to recognize the limits of the market, its invisible hand and the perfect allocation of resources and global supply chains, which allows 8 men to own as much as 3 billion people, but which was unable and continues to be unable to deliver PPE to health workers on the front lines. I think that the pandemic forces us to recognize the work of many people, low paid, invisible, whether they're public health, food service, janitorial, transport, elder care, many others. What can we do to transform crisis to opportunity? I was struck by an illustration from Professor Mariana Mazzucato, a rising economist, who told us that the economists are very good at counting the costs to supply public services, but they have no tools to measure the benefits of public services. In economics, if you can't measure, you don't value. And I think this is one of our key challenges. In PSI, we will mobilize all our members to continue to educate on the main issues, to strengthen our alliances and cooperation, both with UCLG, with Habitat, within our communities at the workplace. We hear a lot about a ground-up approach, hearing from the poorest, from the most vulnerable. This is fundamental, but it's not easy. Consultation mechanisms take time, take resources. We need to strengthen our democracies in order to build the world we want and need. And remember, when we do that, don't forget to listen to the voices of our members, your workers, who have real on-the-ground experience. Look, austerity is not theoretical for our members. Since the global financial crisis, public services, including at local level, have been slashed. The financial community, which was bailed out by the workers, the taxpayers in 2008, insisted on austerity for public services afterwards, all the while building more sophisticated tax dodging mechanisms, facilitating massive wealth accumulation and concentration. So what do we plan on? What do we call for? Our global tax system must urgently be reformed. This must be done within the UN. We need leadership in the UN to deal with this, because without these funds from the multinational corporations and the world's richest, the mayors and our members cannot deliver for citizens. We think there should be an immediate 50% tax on excess profits, an immediate digital services tax on tech giants, and we think no bailout funding for corporations operating through tax havens. We support the call for debt relief, restructuring, and removal of public spending caps and conditionalities. We fight to end privatization and build universal quality public services, universal public health care, education, utilities, transport, and social protections free at the point of access. To conclude, if there's one thing the coronavirus crisis shows us, is that everything seems impossible until it happens. So now, let's deal with the challenges ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, David, also for ending with a positive message. But you have highlighted very well the need to respect the workers, the public service workers, the limits of markets, and the importance to calculate the benefits of public services, which is going to be important moving forward. I would like to thank the six eminent speakers and conclude with a brief few words of summary before I hand over back to Emilia to transition to the next panel. I think the six speakers have highlighted also all of them challenges, different challenges that local and regional governments and public sectors workers are facing in terms of mobility, in terms of education, energy, environmental protection, but also some of the solutions in housing, in other areas, looking at livelihoods, and all of them also emphasizing the challenges of revenue collection during this period, but also the importance to strengthen governance system and the need to adopt ground up approaches to combating this pandemic. So thank you so much for the six speakers, and I hand back over to Emilia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raf, for your help with this panel. A very good facilitation, and you're really on time. Very important messages on service delivery, and we are now going to transition to the governance issue. Multi-level territorial governance and sustainable financing will be critical to actually protect the public service provision ecosystem that we have been identifying as so critical to achieve the sustainable development goals and to help us get out of this pandemic, but also getting ready for one to come. Our intertwined world will need to face this crisis, and we will need to address the governance issue if we want to succeed. We are very honored to have with us the UN Assistant Secretary General and UNDP Director of the Bureau for Policy and Program Support, Mr. Hao Yang to facilitate this session, also with a very diverse panel. Thank you very much, Assistant Secretary General, for being with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Emilia. I'm very honored to have this opportunity to facilitate this discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank all co-organizers, for this important event. That's UN-DESA, UN Habitat in Local 2030, and the Global Taskforce of Local and Regional Governments. And this third local and regional government forum at the time of a high-level political forum, I think is an indication that the issue of local governments is really an important issue, on the minds of all stakeholders, from local governments to national governments, and to, as we know, other stakeholders such as the trade unions and other colleagues who are involved in getting service delivered at all levels. And so I'm very happy to moderate this session on multi-level governance and sustainable financing. As Emilia pointed out, these are really critical issues, especially now in light of the COVID-19 and its impact. Right? We know that cities have emerged as hotspots for COVID-19, especially where there are large number of vulnerable, population. Right? And I think Mahmoud, Mohieldin said earlier, alluded to UNDP's Human Development Report 2019, which pointed that the high level of inequality and deprivation, right, the poor infrastructure and housing and so forth, are really having an impact, on human development. And we know that cities and urban areas account for 80% of the GDP, right? But still, the uneven progress, is making the response to COVID-19 more difficult. And at the same time, we know that the pandemic also highlights the critical role of local governments as a frontline responders in crisis response, recovery, and rebuilding, right? And given the larger scale of the impacts, and the needs, and also the decline in their budgets and financial capabilities. The local government's ability to deliver essential services and the infrastructure and so forth are also critically constrained, as the previous session also highlighted. So that's why this session is important, because it addresses multi-level cooperation. It's not just local governments, but other levels of governments also needed to support. That's why in this panel, I'm very happy that not only do we have mayors and frontline responders, we also have a national governments, ministry, to join the session. And we also have an academic, professor from Harvard University to share, insights, on these very critical issues of multi-level cooperation and also sustainable financing. And just to say that access to finance is a major constraint to cities and regional governments worldwide. We know that it's challenging. Okay? And given the pandemic situation, many cities, which rely on local sales tax, parking fees, or utility incomes from businesses and so forth, right, suddenly are questioning their ability to fund essential services, right? So that again calls into question of national level support and other means of financing, innovative means of financing to deal with this. So the World Bank has estimated that for 2021, there will be a gap of 15 to 25%, of a gap in local level financing. So this is quite significant, right? And some cities face even more challenging. Okay. So what do we do now, right? We know that the challenges for dealing with this multi-level cooperation and especially financing to attract investment is often affected by the perception of a high level of risk of markets, especially in emerging markets. The investors are not willing, they are concerned about the risks. So what can we do about de-risking these perceptions of risks and the real risks? And then also, we also have the problem of lack of investment-ready opportunities. Right? So often people say that there's a lot of money. Right? We know that there's a lot of money in different sources of funding, right? Especially in private sources of funding. We know governments will never have enough funding to fund development. But the problem is lack of bankable projects. What can we do about these kind of issues? Okay. And then there's also this issue of concerns about regulatory environment in many countries and cities. We know that many cities don't have a credit rating, right? So this all makes predictable investment and risk-taking behavior more complicated. So I think with all these kind of questions, we do want to address in this panel, okay, the issue of multi-level cooperation, right? National, regional, local, right? And international multilateral cooperation, right? And we know that financing is a challenge, right? But we do have a mix of domestic, international financing. We have a public and private financing, right? And we have different instruments, that we can mobilize. So I guess with all these questions, I think we have this great panel for you, okay? I understand that the mayor of Bogota may be running a little bit late, but we'll see how things go. But first, then I would like to introduce our first speaker, the mayor of Polokwane, from South Africa, and so Ms. Thembisile Ngadime, is an executive mayor of the city of Polokwane, and she's elected mayor since July 2014, right? And he's the first woman executive mayor as representative of the African National Congress. And she has dedicated her life advocating social cohesion through several senior positions in the ANC and the national government of South Africa. Right? She's also a distant president of the South African Association of Local Governments. So without further ado, I give the floor to you, Honorable Mayor.
And I will say good day to all of us who are at different hours, my colleagues from the United Nations Habitat, UNDP, UCLG, DESA, the Global Taskforce. I'm happy to be part of this local and regional government forum discussion today. I think I'm going to raise 3 critical points from what we have raised. The first one being how the pandemic has galvanized us to play a critical role in raising public awareness as regional and local governments and maintaining the functionality of basic public service provision across for our citizens and in our territories. These basic public services must be supported by adequate and sustainable financing. And you have touched on that key point that sometimes government do not have sufficient funding. Allow for local governments to continue to protect the citizens, to develop them, to invest in infrastructure, and support sanitary measures in times of the pandemic and in general economic meltdown times, as well as to ensure that there is no one who is left behind. Because infrastructure development in municipalities is not selective, it's for all use of all the citizens that are within that municipality. Secondly, I think we must prioritize the development of strong systems of universal health care, supported by, of course, the basic safe provision that I've spoken about. This will only be possible through adequate and sustainable financing, as I've said, but also basic private services where we have allowed everybody to participate and be part and play a role in preventing and responding to the crises by protecting and safeguarding the health and the rights of citizens in delivering universal basic services. So which means this will be from health services to housing, to education, food security, which is sometimes a very poignant point, from water to waste management, to mobility and digital policies, which allows our people to be able to have access, but also to have participation in a digital platform, which could allow us to move across the world without necessarily physically doing so. Thirdly, to ensure that more just than a resilient future and the provision of basic services, we must support the measures in the time of the pandemic. A strengthened multilateral system needs to be developed, built, and informed by the priorities of local and regional governments. We need to ensure that that becomes a reality. So our recovery post the pandemic should include investment towards a more inclusive and sustainable green future for our municipalities, national cooperation. And this is where this multilateral system comes into multi-level governance and support to local service. So I think some of the things which we have learned now do not necessarily want us to practice them under the pandemic only, or as we fight the scourge of the pandemic worldwide, but we also need to make sure that beyond we learn new measures that we have been taught, unfortunately, by the virus and the difficulty that it has brought, but we could be able to learn from it. Therefore, beyond and during this crisis, it is important that in the response, all levels of government maintains the sustainability of local public service provision, as well as sustainable development goals and climate commitments needs to be the focus. It is usually tempting for national government to leave local government behind as they plan and develop, forgetting that everything happens at a local municipality, and we need the support for the local municipalities to thrive. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Mayor. I think you made some really important points. And I think the issue of learning from the pandemic, right? And the issue of really keeping important development commitments, including climate change, and also the issue of emphasizing the point that development takes place at the local level at the end of the day. So I will not repeat all what you said, but just some of the things that really struck as really important. And you said that learning from the pandemic, and go beyond the pandemic, I think is really important point. Thank you very much. So next, I think as the mayor of Bogota is late, I will just introduce the mayor of Bonn. Mr. Ashok Sridharan is the mayor of Bonn, and also the president of ICLEI, the Local Governments for Sustainability, an international organization based in Bonn. Mr. Sridharan is the mayor of Bonn since October 2015, and he is committed to Bonn's role, as Germany's United Nations city, right, which is hosting many governmental and non-governmental organizations, intergovernmental organizations in Bonn, and has a growing international community. And at the same time, the city is facing a lot of challenges, including the influx of refugees and so forth. And so in this climate of COVID-19 and so forth, I'm sure all these problems are compounding to the challenges that Mayor Sridharan has to deal with. So, so what are your views, in a few seconds, or in a few minutes, how what kind of advice you can give to us? So the floor is yours, Honorable Mayor.
Thank you very much, and a good afternoon from Germany, esteemed audience. 5 years ago, the leaders of the world agreed on the 2030 agenda as a universal agenda to end poverty, protect the planet, and improve the lives and prospects of everyone, everywhere. The 2020 high-level political forum on the SDGs is the right moment to focus on a decade of action for sustainability. COVID-19 as a global pandemic will change our ways of life and our societies, of course. Let us turn this challenge into a shift to more ambitious commitment. If we are to leave no one behind, cities and regions must respond first. This is why ICLEI has embarked on the 5 pathways of sustainable urban development in 2018. These help to advance the urban SDG 11 and mainstream our topics throughout the 2030 agenda. This universal agenda is a multi-level agenda by definition. As the focal point for the Global Taskforce to the Rio Conventions on Climate, Nature and Land, ICLEI is both commending and seeking positive examples on multi-level and collaborative action. This is also visible in the Sendai framework on disaster risk reduction at the new urban agenda. While cities and regions continue to raise their ambition and to partner up with national strategies, multi-level cooperation needs to be extended across all aspects of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Amidst the global pandemic, we are approaching the point of no return in climate change, rapid loss of biodiversity, and devastating effects of land degradation. If this is not a global emergency, what is? We need action, and we need it now. ICLEI continues to champion accelerating action on SDGs, from cohort trainings in the USA to national capacity building in South Korea, from action-oriented guidance in Africa to the Basque Declaration in Europe. COVID-19 recovery can absolutely unlock the necessary transformation. And in a multi-level effort, we can multi-purpose our investments. With the European New Green Deal, I see potential to relocate and reshape budgets in ways that achieve many goals, if we manage to bring all levels to the table. Localizing the SDGs is key. Cities have assumed new instruments, in particular local SDG strategies and voluntary local reviews. In 2019, Bonn published its first encompassing sustainability strategy. We will present our first voluntary local review this autumn. I commend all cities issuing VLRs and invite nations to integrate those in their voluntary national reviews using the transformative power of multi-level collaborative action. Channeling resources from COVID-19 recovery deals to sustainable urban and territorial development is the first litmus test. Secondly, local and regional climate commitments have to feed into the next generation of nationally determined contributions well before Climate COP26 in Glasgow in 21. Finally, the deal for nature at the Biodiversity COP15 in Kunming should elevate the successful efforts of local and subnational governments. In times of unprecedented challenges, the pathway to sustainability shall not be locked. Local and regional governments may steer a sustainable recovery to globally build back better for a sustainable urban future. As Mayor of Bonn and President of ICLEI, I strongly believe in three principles. First, there is no urbanization of the future if not sustainable urbanization. Second, there is no going back, there's only going on better. And third, optimism is part of human nature. It is part of my nature. We can do this together, leaving no one behind, speeding up our results now. Let me close with an invitation. ICLEI, Bonn, and many partners are governing Daring Cities 2020 as a virtual event from 7th to 28th October. More than an event, Daring Cities will be a positive movement in times of overwhelming emergencies. I invite you to join this platform and be a part of this community of transformation. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Honorable Mayor, for a very comprehensive description of ICLEI's activities and plans and vision. I think your course for addressing sustainability is really at the core, of how we should deal with this pandemic. We know that the pandemic, is exacerbated by the lack of care for nature, right? And we are losing the size of the forest, the size of France every year, despite the decades of action, for climate, And we know that the threshold for zoonotic diseases is reduced because of the lack of care for nature, the degradation of habitat, and the loss of water and soil resources and so forth. So I think your core, to focus on sustainability is extremely timely, And you highlighted a number of important issues. The voluntary local report, I think is a really effective tool, for local action, right, to engage citizens in the process. And incorporating this in national volunteer reviews, I think is a very practical way to galvanize, local level engagement in national actions and the international impact. And you mentioned Glasgow and also Kunming, and this year was meant to be a super year for nature, but the conference are delayed, but the actions cannot be delayed. So I think we have to really focus on a lot of issues you highlighted. Climate change, sustainability can be an effective entry point to deal with a set of associated, issues, related to urban sustainability. So thank you very much for your contribution. I'm very happy to say that the mayor of Bogota, has joined us, and we know that Ms. Claudia Lopez, is elected the mayor of Bogota in October 2019, and many say that the mayor of Bogota is a very important, political post, in Colombia, and her election as the first woman, mayor of the capital, made international news. And we also know that she ran a successful campaign based on a strong, effort, of anti-corruption. So, and also she was a vice presidential candidate in Colombia in 2018. So a very accomplished, politician, but also practitioner. So, Honorable Mayor, so what are your, take on some of the challenges we put on the table as a multi-level, cooperation, and also the issue of financing, and also more broad issues. So the floor is yours, Honorable Mayor.
Thank you so much for such a kind introduction, and greetings from Bogota, Colombia. We are having and experiencing, as all the mayors and global mayors around the globe, this enormous challenge, but we're facing it with hope, with decisive care for our people. As we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic has emphasized the importance of local governments. We are the ones actually facing directly taking care of our people, you know, building hospitals, testing people, taking care of them in different ways. And I think this emphasizes the importance not only of our global network, of the Global Task Force of local and regional governments and the UCLG efforts, but maybe we should strengthen directly these sort of connections between local governments to receive assistance, to receive financial assistance, technical assistance, because we are the ones actually having this burden. The second thing that I want to mention is that we should not go into the point to set back to normality, go back to normality. These months from March to June has been very challenging in terms of the pandemic, but has been the more clear, blue skies, no pollution in our city. And that's why we need to take care of a new, green, inclusive, sustainable development agenda for our cities. We cannot get back into the normal of pollution, into the normal of exclusion of our cities. We need to build, and I propose in Bogota, and we were lucky that the City Council approved our development plan for these next 4 years as a new social and environmental contract in our city. This pandemic in a country such as Colombia, which is a mid-level country, mid-level income country, that is just finishing a civil war with extreme inequality, with high levels of poverty. We cannot get back to the normal in which inequality increases, poverty increases, pollution increases. We now have the opportunity to push forward our agenda of sustainable development. In Colombian terms, it means building peace and reconciliation, because war has been such a destructive force in all terms. Second, we need to push forward our agenda for clean air. By the first time, we include in our development plan specific goals of reducing pollution and achieving clean air in our city. We need to push forward our agenda for electrification of the massive transportation, building the metro system, building a regional metro system. Bogota is a global example and will be even more in terms of using bikes, in bike riding in our city. 8% of the total rides in our city are done by bike. That's more than the first line of metro, for example, will carry as riders. So all this agenda of transportation, massive transportation, but clean, without using fuels, all this agenda for improving the pedestrian infrastructure for pedestrians, the public space, will contribute to our agenda of clean air, our goals of clean air and reducing pollution. But it's not only environmental green agenda, it also has to be an inclusive social agenda. Bogota decided to do, by first time in Colombia's history, a basic universal income, for example, for all the poor families, not only for the pandemic, not only for these months to support them in these months of pandemic, but as a political purpose for social and economic inclusion in Bogota, as a way to reduce extreme poverty and extreme inequality and close the gap, especially for women and for young people who are the ones who are being left behind in all this past agenda of unsustainable development. We decided to submit ourselves in the year 2022 to the first in our history, the first local voluntary review for the SDGs agenda, for the 2030 agenda. We're gonna do by first time this voluntary local review in the year 2022 to ensure that the government, society, all the entrepreneurs, all the national government, we are all working hard and achieving the goals so that the SDGs can be achieved in Colombia and in Bogota in the year 2030. In brief, we need not to forget that our most important challenge is climate change. that the pandemic and the COVID-19 is just a conjunctural challenge, but the structural challenge of humanity is climate change. And we cannot reduce our goals or our work or our efforts in reducing climate change. On the other hand, I think we have an opportunity, even with this crisis of the pandemic, with these challenges that it has behind. It's not only trouble, it's not only problems. There are also opportunities, and we need to go for those opportunities. For example, we need to improve the green business agenda, to provide incentives to green business in our city, for businesses in the electronic, the digital era that can help our youth people for new opportunities of income, for new opportunities also of employment. We have opportunities to renew our education, post-secondary education system, to bring more people, more young people and more women in particular to the global labor markets. So these opportunities of green business, of cultural industries, of digital industries is something we are working hard also to take advantage in Bogota. I want to express my gratitude and my honor to be a part of this discussion, of this global discussion. I hope you can come to Bogota as soon as you can. We're gonna overcome these challenges of the pandemic this year. We're gonna continue working hard on the Agenda 2030, and we're gonna take advantage of the new opportunities of green business, of industrial and cultural businesses, and also of digital businesses in our city. And I hope you can do the same in yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mayor Lopez. It seems that you are taking us for a ride, okay, at this time. So thank you for taking time, as you are working, a very in a very busy schedule, to join this session. So it's a good ride, I would say, right? Because I can see that you're actually getting into the subject of next session. I would like the Mayor of Bonn, also get into the vision, for the future. And you outlined a vision, that is essentially not go back to normal, right? Because normal is not good. Where we started is not good. So you needed to take this as an opportunity, to go to a better future, that is, as you said, greener, and more inclusive, right? And more sustainable, future. And you outlined a lot of, ambitious plans, So I don't think we have time to probe you on this, because for all these plans, it seems that it will require a lot of investment, right? Even you have your plan clearly tries to show decoupling of your growth strategy from the carbon, right? You want to have a green growth that is decarbonized, growth. So how, will this be financed, for example? There are a lot of questions I'm sure people have, but I'm also sure that you have a plan, to deal with this, and one of which will be a national collaboration, and so forth. But your talk also raised a question, because Bogota is a major, a city, is an international city, but we also have a lot of cities that are smaller, very small, and also they have different levels of, ability in terms of human resources, financial resources. So I guess these are the questions that we also hope to probe, in the future in the discussions. And so I think this, in a way, is a very good segue, to bring our next speaker, who is a professor, from Harvard University, and Dr. Linda Bioms, is a professor at the Kennedy School of Government, Harvard University, where she teaches public policy, budgeting, and public finance. She's a member of the United Nations Committee of Experts on Public Administration. Okay? And also previously, she served as Assistant Secretary and the Chief Financial Officer of the United States Department of Commerce under the US President Bill Clinton. So I think, from academic point of view, all the problems that we heard earlier, all have, I guess, extreme value, in examination, okay, to be examined. I think so. Dr. Linda realms, what kind of insights you can provide to us, for this discussion? The floor is yours.
Okay. So can you hear me? Okay. Great. Yes. So thank you to everyone, Madam Chairman and Assistant Secretary Xu, to the many people and organizations who helped to organize this conference. I also want to especially say hello to Mayor Lopez. My last trip before the lockdown was to Bogota, so which is a really wonderful city. I teach public urban planning and public finance at Harvard, and I also run the Bloomberg Cities Mayors Training. I'm one of the faculty who does, and we have hundreds of mayors from around the world who are truly extraordinary in different ways. And I'm going to make three main points, which I think will resonate with a lot of the mayors and local leaders here. First of all, this gathering is especially important because in most countries around the world, subnationals, as I refer to state, regional, local, county governments, subnationals are the primary level of government that is responsible for delivering most of the services that lead to the Sustainable Development Goals, including education, clean water, sanitation, basic healthcare, sustainable cities, basic infrastructure, housing, public safety, and many other aspects of the SDGs. And subnationals are also in charge of much of the public spending to achieve these goals. On average, subnationals are responsible for 55% of a country's expenditure on public safety, for 40% of expenditure on public health, 15% of expenditure on social protection, and so forth. And in most cases, subnationals are well on the path to integrating the SDGs into their local finances, or were well on a path to do so, at least prior to the COVID-19 outbreak. And this includes participatory budgeting, using various digitized initiatives to set SDG targets and frameworks. And there was quite a big and robust effort worldwide to integrate and make local budgets conform and align with the SDGs. Unfortunately, subnationals are facing what I call a perfect fiscal storm right now. Subnationals suffer from a kind of existential crisis in their public finance, in that what is a revenue to a subnational government is an expenditure to a national government. Now, we know from our analysis of the 2008 crisis that there is nothing better for a national government to do than to spend at a local level. The economic multiplier, done by many studies by some of the best economists in the world, show that the economic multiplier for central government spending at the local level is between 1.5 and 2. In other words, every $1 spent at the local level produces close to $2 in economic growth for the country if it's spent at the local level. But everything that is happening right now is moving in exactly the opposite direction. The many national governments are reducing budgetary transfers to local governments due to their own, or will be doing so due to their own economic fallout. And at the same time, the own source revenue, which makes up the rest of local government revenue, is most of those sources, including from sources like tourism and transportation, airport landing rights, etc., have been cut radically. At the same time, subnationals are facing more difficult access to capital for those subnationals who borrow directly, and investors that are scrutinizing subnational finances more carefully. And subnational governments are finally at the mercy of neighboring governments and regions that may not be managing things as well as they are. At the same time, subnationals are facing much higher immediate short-term need for expenditures for things related to COVID. And this includes communicating accurate health information to their populations, implementing containment measures such as testing, tracing, isolation, monitoring, coordinating, ensuring compliance, forecasting, and eventually being on the front line of delivering a vaccine, supporting local businesses, supporting local institutions such as schools and hospitals, and ensuring food supplies. I have a lot more to say, and I'm getting the signal to stop, but I will just conclude by saying that accordingly, in order to make progress toward the SDGs, there is absolutely nothing more essential for the world to take emergency steps to support subnational spending and access to capital. And this means that there needs to be a concerted global effort to support subnational governments, including IMF and World Bank lending facilities to ensure liquidity in the subnational sector, as well as direct assistance for subnational spending on essential services, subsidies for public sector salaries, and targeted grants for the subnationals to survive the current crisis. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Belms, for this very clear talk. I think you really made it very clear that the local level expenditure actually is a significant source of growth, for local economy and for national economy. And your call, is really impassionate, I would say, right? It is essential, you said, at this time, to support local level expenditure. Okay, I think it is really a very strong, and impassionate call, for national government's attention. And you also, in a short few minutes, you provided some impressive statistics on the role of local subnationals, as you term them, in terms of public security and expenditure, health, care expenditure, and also social protection expenditure and so forth. So I think it's very clear that the subnationals play a critical role in achieving the SDGs. That's a very clear point. So I guess with this talk, again, it leads me again very nicely to our next speaker, which is the minister from the national government, of Cameroon. So I would introduce our next speaker as Ms. Celestine Cortes, Minister for Habitat and Urban Development of Cameroon. She's appointed as minister in January 2019, but also she is mayor of Bangante, from 2007, okay, and re-elected in 2013 for another term until 2019. So she has quite a few hats, it seems, and also her project, hygiene and sanitation, has earned the city that she's mayor of, the UN Award for Excellence in Public Service in 2014. She also has served as a president of a network of elected women of Africa, from 2015 to 2019, and she's ambassador of French-speaking Africa in the European Union's working groups on dialogue structure on aid. So, given all what you've heard, Minister, and so what should the national governments do, right? And Professor Belms, expressed the worry that at a time when local expenditure and should be considered really importantly, and when they really need this support, right? And there seems to be a trend that national governments are reducing transfers and also, exacerbating the pressure, financial pressure at local levels and so forth. So, what is your take, Honorable Minister? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving me the floor. Mesdames et Messieurs les membres de gouvernements nationaux, Monsieur le Président de CGLU, CGLUA, Madame le Secrétaire Général de CGLU, Monsieur le Secrétaire Général de CGLUA, Madame la Directrice du Bureau exécutif de ONU Habitat, chère Maimunah, Mesdames et Messieurs les directeurs généraux, Mesdames et Messieurs les maires et les élus locaux, permettez-moi de remercier CGLU pour avoir bien voulu m'associer à cet important forum d'échange sur comment les gouvernements locaux et régionaux entreprennent des efforts pour formuler et permettre de mettre en œuvre des stratégies de sécurité et plans d'action en collaboration, bien sûr, avec les communautés locales, gouvernements nationaux et les parties prenantes nécessaires pour garantir les conséquences de la crise. Au moment où la planète tout entière traverse cette crise sanitaire violente aux effets dévastateurs, ce genre de rencontres multi-acteurs en vue de mutualiser nos efforts pour barrer définitivement la voie à la pandémie de coronavirus est donc à saluer. Surtout au moment où le nombre de victimes va croissant de jour en jour en Afrique. Beaucoup a été dit et je voudrais vraiment saluer les différentes interventions avant moi pour dire que tout a été dit. Et je voudrais très sincèrement me permettre de partager avec vous quelques stratégies de mon pays, le Cameroun, qui montrent à suffire l'importance d'une parfaite synergie entre le gouvernement national, les autorités locales, la société civile et les agences des Nations Unies et autres partenaires du développement pour combattre ce virus. Distingués participants, comme la plupart des États du monde, le Cameroun n'a pas été épargné et avec 4 principaux défis à relever, à savoir contenir le virus dans les villes foyers de la pandémie du Covid-19 et préserver bien évidemment la plus importante zone rurale, limiter la propagation du virus au sein des populations habitant les villes de foyers de pandémie, prendre efficacement en charge les cas et réduire le nombre de décès suite à cette pandémie, limiter enfin à court terme ou à moyen terme l'impact socio-économique de la pandémie sur les populations en milieu urbain et rural. Pour ce faire, mesdames et messieurs, 19 mesures ont été prises dans un premier temps, prescrites par le chef de l'État, son Excellence, M. Paul Biya, et rendues publiques par le Premier ministre chef du gouvernement en vue d'endiguer la progression du Covid-19. Au rang de ces mesures, on note l'invitation des populations à observer strictement les mesures d'hygiène recommandées par l'OMS, se laver bien sûr régulièrement les mains au savon, éviter les contacts rapprochés tels que se prendre dans les bras ou s'embrasser, se couvrir la bouche pour éternuer, etc. La fermeture systématique des débits de boissons, des restaurants, lieux de loisirs à partir de 18 h, la limitation des déplacements urbains et interurbains, la fermeture des frontières, l'interdiction de regroupement de près de plus de 50 personnes, etc. La mise en œuvre de ces mesures fait régulièrement d'ailleurs l'objet d'évaluations, ce qui a permis de se rendre compte que les mesures restrictives de l'activité économique ont eu un réel impact sur l'outil de production. D'où l'obligation pour le chef de l'État de rendre public le 30 avril 2020 19 nouvelles mesures visant aussi bien à lutter contre l'évolution de la maladie, mais aussi à stimuler la production tout en accordant des exonérations aux acteurs économiques des secteurs les plus touchés. Ces mesures ont été précédées par la généralisation du port obligatoire du masque dans les espaces publics depuis le 13 avril 2020. Mesdames et messieurs, la mise en œuvre de la stratégie gouvernementale a connu la mobilisation de l'ensemble des acteurs au niveau national, régional, local. Au plan national, des centres de dépistage et de mise en charge, de prise en charge des malades ont été créés. Un fonds dédié a été créé pour alimenter au fur et à mesure des besoins l'évolution de la pandémie. En outre, le chef de l'État a mis en place un fonds spécial pour fournir un appui supplémentaire aux efforts déployés et bien sûr limiter ainsi la propagation du Covid-19 et pouvoir ainsi soigner gracieusement les malades. Les logements sociaux construits et non encore occupés, près de 80 immeubles, soit 100 appartements pour 1386 chambres disponibles, ont été mises à disposition des élus locaux pour accueillir les personnes soupçonnées pour leur mise en quarantaine. Actuellement, le gouvernement met en œuvre des mesures d'assainissement, de désinfection des lieux publics ainsi que des quartiers précaires, des quartiers sous-structurés, afin de ne laisser personne sur le côté. Comme vous l'avez bien suivi, mesdames et messieurs, toutes ces actions se mettent en œuvre au niveau des territoires, en liaison avec les collectivités territoriales décentralisées sur qui les plus grands défis se reposent. Notamment le défi, et Madame le maire de Banjul l'a dit, le défi de faire croire aux populations l'existence même du Covid-19 et le défi de sensibiliser les populations sur l'observance des mesures barrières prescrites par le chef de l'État et l'OMS, le défi de la prise en charge socio-sanitaire des personnes infectées, incluant les aspects tels que l'alimentation et la prise en charge du linge des personnes infectées. La mise à disposition, il faut le relever également, des cimetières dédiés pour accueillir les personnes décédées du fait du Covid-19. La mobilisation des agents communautaires pour lutter contre le Covid-19. Mesdames et messieurs, comme vous le voyez, il y a eu besoin d'une synergie forte entre les élus locaux, le gouvernement national, les partenaires au développement, les organes des Nations Unies. Et je voudrais conclure en disant que le coronavirus a déstabilisé la planète. Mais également, comme l'a dit certains, c'est une opportunité pour penser comment travailler ensemble, tous les acteurs, afin que le développement durable, c'est-à-dire que 2030 soit faisable, parce que le coronavirus nous aura suffisamment freinés. Merci encore de nous avoir permis de montrer comment, à l'échelle du Cameroun, le gouvernement national, les acteurs de développement, le secteur privé, la société civile et les maires ont rendu ce combat, parce que les combats se gagnent au niveau des territoires, ont rendu ce combat possible pour freiner la propagation du coronavirus. Merci de nous avoir invités. Thank you, my dear Emilia.
Thank you, Honorable Minister, for this elaboration of what the national government of Cameroon is doing about COVID-19. I think you outlined a lot of measures that the government is taking, but I guess for the purpose of discussion, I just highlight one sentence I think you said, that is, you're mobilizing, all levels of the partners, and to achieve the goal. So I think your talk clearly does highlight, that to deal with the pandemic, to not go back to the past normal, but to get out of this to a better future. The collaboration at all levels is critical. So thank you very much, for your discussion. So I think because of time, colleagues, I think we really don't have opportunity to get more details, of the substance, But I think just to say that the discussion really highlights the important issues that we see, in dealing with the pandemic, and all this highlights the importance of collaboration at all different levels, right? And many important issues were mentioned. UNDP recently published a report called Beyond Recovery Towards 2030. And we looked at the 7 tipping points that are, we consider critical, that led to us, to this crisis, but also tipping points that can help us get out of this, crisis. That includes all the issues we talked about, starting from the social contracting services, right, basic, to universal, healthcare, even universal basic income type of ideas, to climate, to nature-based solutions, to diversity and inclusion, gender equality, to digital interruption, to peace, right? And to a rebirth of multilateralism, because we know that no one is safe until everyone is safe, right? It requires really international collaboration as well. So I thank all participants for this very rich discussion. And hopefully, we get even more details, in the next session on building back better. So I'll give the floor back to Emilia. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Assistant Secretary General and UNDP Director for the Bureau of Policy and Program Support. A very rich panel indeed. And if you allow me, I have one request for the floor from the UN Special Envoy on Disability and Accessibility, and she cannot be with us later. So with your agreement, I will give her 3 minutes before we wrap up and take a break. María Soledad Cisternas, ¿está lista para intervenir brevemente?
Muy buenos días a todos y a todas. Quisiera decirles que la gobernanza global, nacional y local van de la mano en orden a la satisfacción de las necesidades de las personas. Y en eso debemos considerar la frase que nadie quede atrás a más de 1.000 millones de personas con discapacidad en el mundo y más de 900 millones de personas mayores. La pandemia nos ha demostrado que la accesibilidad una vez más ha sido insuficiente y por eso creo que la accesibilidad durante todos estos años es la figura más transversal en derechos humanos. Hace un año atrás señalé en Naciones Unidas que la Declaración Política de Salud debería contemplar como principio la accesibilidad. También he señalado en Naciones Unidas que las ciudades inteligentes no serán realmente inteligentes si no son totalmente accesibles. Y finalmente, el financiamiento para las ciudades inteligentes o accesibles también vienen desde el espacio fiscal y desde el aporte del sector privado, ya que la accesibilidad transversaliza los distintos ODS, incluso aquello que se refiere a la producción inclusiva. Esto significa accesibilidad. Esto no es más costo para las empresas. Por lo tanto, quiero recalcar que en el High Level Political Forum, desde el año próximo en adelante, seguramente va a esperar mucha información sobre cómo se ha implementado en legislación, en políticas públicas, en medidas específicas, el tema de la respuesta participativa e inclusiva a la pandemia de todas las personas. Y esto con datos y estadísticas, con especial foco en accesibilidad universal. Tenemos que recordar que la Agenda 2030 y los compromisos en derechos humanos, como la Convención sobre los Derechos de las Personas con Discapacidad, no se suspenden por la pandemia. Y las obligaciones de accountability continúan y son más y más exigibles. Termino mi mensaje señalando que los gobiernos locales tienen un compromiso y una oportunidad maravillosa, haciendo el consecuente partenariado con los gobiernos centrales, con el apoyo de los gobiernos centrales, los gobiernos locales en continua relación con los ciudadanos y con las personas, están llamadas a dar esta respuesta participativa e inclusiva, y también la información que se contendrá en los informes nacionales voluntarios. En ese sentido, no olviden jamás la columna vertebral que implica la accesibilidad. Más accesibilidad es menos pobreza. Y ustedes cuentan con mi mandato de enviada especial para estas finalidades. Muchas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, enviada especial, por estar aquí con nosotros, por acompañarnos en mejorar las ciudades para todas y para todos. The work that we have done traditionally with UN special envoys have really marked a difference in how far the messages of local and regional governments have been able to go in the international debate. And we really look forward to working with you to transform our cities, but also to make sure that the voices from the local and regional governments are heard. So thank you for being with us. And colleagues, we have reached the end of this morning. We are going to do a small, short break, and we will come back at the hour. As you know, we have interpretation and the interpreters do need a break. We will be coming back at 11 o'clock New York time and at 5 o'clock European time. Thank you very much for your attention, and don't go away. Come back, stay with us. Thank you very much.
to check and see if you can hear me. Hello, this is Elliot Harris. Can you hear me okay?
Welcome back, colleagues. This is Emilia Said from United Cities and Local Governments. I am the Master of Ceremonies of this third session of our Local and Regional Governments Forum within the context of the High-Level Political Forum. It's an special event that we are delighted to co-organize as Global Taskforce with UN-DESA, UN Habitat, UNDP, and Local 2030. We've had two very interesting sessions and a great opening. So we are looking forward to this third session on building back better. A lot has been said about the priorities and the shift in our thinking within the framework of the global pandemic that we are facing. And of course, the title of this session says already a lot about the commitment of the local and regional government constituency on how we see things happening. I am delighted that we have with us the Assistant Secretary General for Economic Development and Chief Economist of the United Nations, Mr. Elliot Harris, that will be moderating the session with many and diverse local elected leaders from around the world. So I hope you are ready, Mr. Elliot. Are you here, Elliot Harris?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
We can hear you very well, and we can see you very well as well. So, in your hands, sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Emilia. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, good evening throughout the world. It's my pleasure to moderate this very important discussion on how we build back better from the COVID-19 pandemic. The previous sessions, as Emilia said, have clearly shown the critical role that local governments have had in reducing the spread of the virus and in mitigating its impacts, be it through the continuous delivery of basic services, increased healthcare provision, emergency shelters, contact tracing and data collection, or opening up additional public spaces and green areas, just to name some of the actions that have been taken already. As the COVID-19 pandemic keeps the world in its grip, however, it's critical for us to learn from each other on how we can use the SDGs as a framework for better recovery from this paralyzing pandemic. While the situation seems dire, it is important for us to see how we can look forward, build back better, and even perhaps leapfrog, using to the best extent the resources that we must find for the recovery from this pandemic. Increased and much needed additional investments to ensure universal access to basic services, including water and sanitation, healthcare, education, and the internet, can help us to make long-term improvements and to support those that are being left the furthest behind. Ever-falling prices of renewables can now help us to put clean energy at the heart of our recovery efforts. New digital technologies that have been deployed can enhance public service delivery and increase remote working, and innovative solutions can reduce the digital divide. However, it is clear that this pandemic has also magnified and brought out into the open the multiple and deep inequalities that exist in our societies. We must use this increased focus to identify those being left behind and to formulate policies and innovations that tackle inequalities in all their dimensions. The recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic cannot be built on the backs of those who have already been trampled upon. It is time for genuine solidarity and collaboration. With these remarks, I'd like to turn now to our featured speakers. Each speaker will have about 7 minutes to make their presentation. Unfortunately, our format today will not allow directly for questions and answers from the audience. And I'd like to note up front that unfortunately, Ms. Fatma Sahin, the mayor of Gaziantep, who was slated to join us, is unfortunately prevented from being with us today. So without further ado, I'd like to invite our first speaker, Mr. Ilsur Metsin, who is the mayor of Kazan and the president of the UN Advisory Committee of Local Authorities, to take the floor. Mr. Metsin, over to you.
I'm sorry, just to let you know that we have been informed he will be 10 minutes late. So if we can go to the next speaker in your list, I think it will be being Dries.
Indeed. Indeed. In that case, Mr. Dries, who's the Mayor of Genk and also the Chairman of the Association of Flemish Cities and Municipalities in Belgium. Mr. Dries, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and also welcome to all the participants for this third meeting today. And indeed, we already had some interesting people that joined us, and we could listen to a lot of elements that have brought in today. Well, I would also like to start with a quote from a Flemish professor of public administration, Professor Geert Boekaert. And he said, if the 17 SDGs had already been realized, both the chance of the COVID-19 crisis or even subsequent crises and the impact of such a shock would be much less significant. This is also supported by findings in the recently published Sustainable Development Report led by Jeffrey Sachs. The report, for example, shows that Asian countries have made the most progresses towards the SDGs since their adoption in 2015. It's also these countries that have responded most effectively to the corona outbreak when it started. Well, we have to acknowledge that we are taking steps forwards, also locally in realizing Agenda 2030, but we have to be fully aware that we are definitely not there yet. Sudden and severe shocks like COVID-19 have a tremendous effect on progress for the SDGs and on the way we deal with sustainable development. The COVID-19 pandemic is working as a magnifying glass that highlights the areas where we are already behind. Measures taken to protect human life and to minimize pressure on the healthcare services have negative trade-offs regarding, for example, economic activities and waste management. COVID-19 has even put the stress to the coherence within one single SDG, namely SDG 3. Protection of the physical health might adversely affect mental well-being. Also, the pandemic has further exacerbated existing vulnerabilities and inequalities. However, we also have to acknowledge that opportunities to build back better, and building back better means building back differently. And I have listened to my colleague of Bonn, who also quoted, there is no going back, only going on better. And I think that is what building back differently means, building back better, that there's no going back to normal and there shouldn't be one. So if we look to the policy solutions to this crisis and probably also other crises, we think that there are three important pillars to take in account. First of all, policies should have to be sustainable, both globally and of course locally. The SDGs and the principle of leaving no one behind are more relevant than ever. We have noticed that also here in Flanders, if I look to my own city, but also to the region, it is important that with the change of policies, and we've had just the start of a new policy period in the regional and in the local governments for 6 years, we have seen that bringing in the SDGs is very important to get it all to a sustainable basis. Secondly, and of course, local governments are indispensable actors in the post-corona strategy. During the crisis, we have shown that and are still showing resilience and also flexibility. We are doing everything in our power to continue providing first-line services to our citizens and to implement national guidelines. Examples like health and local economy, we are really working on that. We have taken additional measures such as the deployment of volunteers to contact and assist the elderly. If I look to my own city, we managed to have immediately 1% of our inhabitants that were voluntarily helping in a lot of actions towards our elderly people. And also to establishment of digital platforms to support local businesses. We have really seen a change that local businesses would really go online and take this opportunity to change things for a more sustainable way. We also show solidarity with our counterparts around the world through financial support and exchange of expertise. In addition, local authorities have for the last couple of years gained expertise on the Agenda 2030. And as I was telling, have adapted also in Flanders their policy accordingly. At this moment, 200 of the 300 municipalities of Flanders have integrated SDGs in their policy plans. They use SDGs as a common language in citizen participation, but also in relation with the stakeholders. And we are working on those SDG reporting. We also find that very important to do so. This brings me to my last point. I was given 3 points that I think that are very important for the exit strategy, but also for the recovery and the plan that we have to go further on to do it better in the future. And that is that I do believe in SDG 17 on partnerships. It will be key because we cannot do it alone. We have to do it together. A truly sustainable policy strategy includes coordination between different government levels and cross-disciplinary collaboration. We have also noticed that here in Flanders and in Belgium, we're not the most simple governments or multi-level governments that you can have, but it was very important to work together. And we have tried to gain our place in that pyramid of command and to see that we as local governments can advise and can give our experience also to the federal government and to work together. And that even was not easy here, but it definitely is the plan for the future that we have to be more together also in the seats, in the driver's seats, to give the advice that is necessary for us as local governments, because we are doing it with the people in the streets and in the neighborhoods. The relevance and the experience of local governments with Agenda 2030, combined with their frontline position in combating Corona, make local governments and also their umbrella associations indispensable partners in the development of a sustainable post-Corona strategy, both nationally, of course, but also internationally. We must have the necessary competences and financial resources. We must not only be heard, but be given a place at the discussion table. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is not always that easy. So when we are working in our cities, when we are working in our streets, we should also use our umbrella associations and work together to see that our voice will be heard by the national, but also the international governments, because the change is locally and we have to do it locally. And I believe if you want to do it, just do it. And that is what we have done. And that should we also do in our discussion in building back better, because I think local governments are key. So that was my intervention, ladies and gentlemen, about what we can do. And I believe that those 3 pillars are really important to change also building back better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dries, for those very insightful remarks. Let me turn now to our next speaker. This is Ms. Adriana Allen, the President of the Habitat International Coalition. Ms. Allen, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, and good day to all and each of you. And of course, many thanks to UCLG, UN Habitat and partners for your continuous efforts to articulate the work of civil society organizations and local and regional governments at such a critical time. Among the many things we have learned throughout this crisis is that substantial progress towards the SDG in the aftermath of COVID-19 will depend on grounded alliances and transformative actions. The pandemic has brought to the surface not only the structural inequalities we face, but also the endless reservoir of care, commitment, and ingenuity of local governments and communities. They have been at the forefront in taking rapid and bold responses to this crisis. In most cases, they have done so without adequate resources, and at points even challenging indecisive, reluctant, and sometimes even authoritarian national authorities. Almost overnight, local governments and communities have mobilized all resources at hand and wide networks of in-kind support. Furthermore, we have witnessed great efforts to decommodify access to basic goods and services for all. This has happened through measures such as repurposing public buildings to provide shelter for the homeless, pausing evictions, introducing rent and service moratoriums, activating support lines to protect care workers, as well as women and children suffering domestic violence, building pop-up health facilities, food banks, and communal kitchens, among many other measures that have made a huge difference for many. Such local actions are not isolated measures, but have emerged at scale and across the urban world, in the hundreds of cities and towns where 95% of COVID-19 impacts have been mostly felt in more than 200 countries. We should not forget that all the enormous capacities displayed throughout the pandemic to do things differently, to protect lives and habitat rights to an extent that seemed to be impossible just a few months ago. The challenge now is to sustain and deepen the wave of local actions unleashed throughout the COVID-19 crisis. Is this about building back better? I would argue that we need more than that. We are not talking about bouncing back from a war or a devastating earthquake, but about bouncing forward from a health crisis that made evident the need to tackle long overdue challenges. The combination of public health crisis and economic paralysis has fallen hard upon the working and excluded minorities. We know that it will worsen poverty, joblessness, homelessness, hunger, and gender and race inequality. Now more than ever, we must oppose the traditional recipes of capital. Overcoming the crisis must not depend on financial flows in favor or under the control of private interests or speculators. In an interview in early April this year, the director of UNDP warned us that COVID-19 threatens to impose 2 decades of lost progress on many countries. Many regions across the world, and across the Global South in particular, already know what it means to go through a lost decade. It is not just about turning the clock back 10 years, but about mortgaging the lives and opportunities of entire generations, risking further erosion of public and universal health, education, housing, services, employment, and social protection systems. Also in earlier April, and at a time in which the impact of the pandemic was only beginning to be felt in many regions, the UN Secretary General estimated the need to mobilize an international assistance plan equivalent to 10% or more of global GDP. Today, however, international and regional efforts on this front are still marginal, and they must be broadened and thought of as the equivalent of a localized Marshall Plan, not just for building back better, but for building forward transformative change. Local governments and communities are listening. They are closer than any other actor to the felt needs for change on the ground, but they also need to be listened to. They need to be resourced and empowered to craft, drive, and sustain a transformative and integrated agenda. They need the full backing of national governments and the international community to turn this critical moment into a historical turning point, to really move towards the ambition of leaving no one and no place behind. Such transformation can only be achieved under substantial distributed measures and a deep recognition of the value of the life of everyone, regardless of their class, gender, sexuality, race, ethnicity, religion, age, or physical and mental ability. Actions need to speak to the reality of the poor, informal workers, racialized groups, migrants and refugees, indigenous peoples, the more than 1 billion who live at risk of evictions, and to a large extent, the women who live at the intersection of these multiple social identities. Our obligation is not only the exercise of solidarity in times of crisis, but also the responsibility to push a different social and political conversation. Diversity like difference can no longer be synonymous with equality. We need new forms of redistribution, recognition, and parity in political participation in order to protect the collective construction of life, habitat, and dwelling. A safe place where we can all live in peace and dignity is possible. Let's join forces in calling for empowering local and regional governments, but also communities to work closely together and to lead the journey. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Ms. Allen. I would like to check first to see if our next speaker is online, Mr. Armand Beiwinde, who's the mayor of Ouagadougou. Mr. Beiwinde, are you with us yet? If not, then I'll turn to Mr. Andrew Wilson, who's the permanent observer for the International Chamber of Commerce to the United Nations. Andrew, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Elliot, and many, many thanks for the very kind invitation to participate today. I think what I'm going to say is very similar to many of the previous interventions, albeit with a view from the real economy, a view from the private sector rather than local government. But essentially in thinking about the necessary rebuild from COVID-19, we think there needs to be an honest, open, and a pretty fundamental debate about why do we find ourselves in the situation we're in today. And ultimately, from the International Chamber of Commerce, we think the debate needs to be focused very squarely on addressing the fundamental fragilities which have been exposed and have accelerated in many ways the crisis. And to our mind, that means starting to look at three specific issues, three specific fragilities: economic exclusion, social inequality, and environmental degradation. And unless we can look at these in a holistic way, looking at the respective roles and responsibilities of government, civil society, and the private sector, we feel there is little chance of building back better. And ultimately, we think that the key lesson from this crisis is the need to build resilience into our global and local economic systems. And that can be only done if we look at the fragilities that have led us to the situation we find ourselves in today. Clearly, from a business perspective, the crisis that we're currently facing is at an enormous scale. We talk to CEOs of large companies through our network who are fundamentally concerned about the risk of systems collapse in certain economies and the implications that that will ultimately have for supply and demand. And we also speak to many, many SME managers and owners who are deeply concerned about their ability to survive over the next 12 months. And that's shown by pretty much every survey we've seen of business leaders over the past few months. So I don't think we can underestimate the scale of the rebuild that is ultimately going to be required in the months and years ahead. And I think we have to approach the rebuild in a holistic way to allow us to rebuild in a resilient manner. And in that, we see obviously an understandable focus on global issues in many debates. And those global issues do need to be addressed. I think one of the weaknesses we've seen from the global response to COVID-19, and perhaps, as some people have said, perhaps the real black swan of this crisis has been the ineffectiveness of international cooperation. That does need to be addressed. There does need to be an international dimension to the rebuild. But ultimately, as we've seen, I think through the early days of the crisis, local solutions have huge value. And when we're talking about the survival of SMEs, we are talking about local businesses. And I think we really need to focus and drill down on the absolute imperative to not only allow small businesses to survive this crisis, but to thrive in the long term. And I think we've seen some really interesting innovations over the last few months, such as the use of localization networks to support small businesses, so internet platforms being used not only in a global way, but in ways that allow local communities to support their local businesses. And we think there is a really essential role for local solutions. And the one thing I would say just on that is that really speaks to the need for local infrastructure, whatever that may look like, whether it's digital or physical. We also need to really look at the financing needs of local authorities, but in particular, small businesses. And the one thing we're seeing time and time again from discussions with our network is the concern businesses have in accessing the credit they will need, not only emergency finance to bridge the drop in demand we've seen over the last few months, but that the finance they will need for their operations going forward. We've estimated, for instance, that there could be, coming out of this crisis, a $5 trillion shortfall in trade finance, trade-related finance, which many small businesses need to be able to trade across borders. So we really need to look at not only global cooperation, which in itself is vital, but actually the local needs of business, local solutions, and most fundamentally, how do we get the finance that will be needed to allow local businesses to thrive in the long term? And how do we do that in a way that allows us to build a resilient global and local economy, addressing the three fundamental fragilities I mentioned earlier: economic exclusion, social inequality, and environmental degradation. And if we don't address each of those in a holistic way, globally and locally, we will not achieve the rebuild we want to see. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for those insightful remarks. Let me turn now to Mr. Ilsur Metşin, who is the Mayor of Kazan and the President of the UN Advisory Committee of Local Authorities. Mr. Metşin, over to you.
Hello, dear colleagues. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to get together to discuss the challenges the world is facing today, to share the experience in confronting the crisis and the vision of sustainable development strategies. And I would like to express, first of all, my gratitude to the organizers of the forum, the World Secretariat of UCLG, UN Habitat, the Office of the UN Secretary General for the ongoing efforts to unite the regional and municipal authorities from around the globe. And I would like to thank and express gratitude to Mr. Elliot Harris, our moderator. So we are all going through difficult times. Local authorities and their administrations are at the forefront of the battle against COVID-19 pandemic. And the lives of people, their safety and their well-being depend on the efficiency and reasonableness of the decisions we make. And the importance of the local and regional authorities has become apparent to the whole world. The world is changing drastically. The way we live, study, work, and communicate. The standard of life nowadays is online interaction. And we see the new round of IT technology and artificial intelligence development. And all these processes are changing the urban ecosystem as a whole. And our cities will never be the same again. For all of us now, the priority issue is ensuring the safety of the urban environment for our residents. And while before, by security, we primarily understood physical security and atmosphere of peace, then in the era of COVID and post-COVID era, the trajectory changed dramatically and shifted towards ensuring sanitary safety, creating conditions for good hygiene, eliminating threats to the health of citizens. These issues are now more important than ever. And for all of us, for a long time to come, we will need to find the ways for their adequate and prompt resolution. The unexpected outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic is a chance to focus on the rising opportunities, or on what can and should be changed in modern cities, and especially in terms of their technological and digital development. In prosperous and peaceful times, most innovations are difficult to take root and slowly accepted by residents. But now, after emergency, I would say abrupt mass transfer to online format, we can seriously talk about the conversion of all types of municipal services to digital form, thereby creating the conditions for maintaining sustainable development. The goal of introducing digital technologies is now not only improving the quality of life in the city, but also provision of vital support in the event of global cataclysm. The pandemic has shown that the rapid introduction of technology is possible. And the main task of modern cities will be to maintain this trend without reducing the momentum we gained. Urban life can receive a qualitatively new impetus for development. E-government, e-medicine, teleconsultations, remote work, online education, and e-commerce have already become part of everyday life. Ensuring the safety of life and health of citizens, we must keep a close eye on the business environment. Small and medium-sized businesses, that was shared by our colleague just recently. And here we can also take advantage of the information technologies, with the help of which it is possible to establish effective interaction between business and city services, eliminating the human factor. I'm sure that these difficult times will pass and our commitment and experience will remain with us. And the current situation has shown us as never before the exceptional importance of replicating and scaling up the world's best practices for implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. We stand in full solidarity with the efforts that local authorities around the world are taking to maintain stability. We are working closely and continuously with our colleagues from around the world. We're holding online conferences, sharing experiences, and supporting each other. And I'm sure that our cooperation is the very key to counteracting global challenges. Esteemed colleagues, today almost 2/3 of the world's population live in the city. And in the future, this figure will only grow. The world evolving from the cities is likely to be more innovative, less warlike, more open to cooperation. I wish all participants of our forum good health and well-being, and looking forward to new meetings and fruitful dialogue. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Let me turn now to our next speaker, who comes from Burkina Faso. This is Mr. Armand Bewinde, who's the mayor of Ouagadougou. Mr. Mayor, you have the floor.
Oui, bonjour tout le monde. Excusez-moi du retard parce que j'avais des problèmes de connexion. On a eu une grosse pluie cette nuit donc, sur Ouagadougou, donc on avait des problèmes de connexion. Et je tiens vraiment à remercier avant tout propos la Global Taskforce et particulièrement le CGLU et le FMDV pour l'invitation qui m'a été adressée et pour parler ce jour, invitant au dialogue et à l'échange en vue de faire face à la pandémie du Covid-19. C'est en effet dans ces moments difficiles que nous devons faire preuve de solidarité et d'entraide en renforçant la coopération et la co-construction des réponses globales. Enfin, de pouvoir assister nos peuples en ne laissant personne sur le bas-côté de la route, en particulier les personnes les plus vulnérables, notamment les personnes du troisième âge, les femmes et les jeunes, dans nos centres urbains et dans nos campagnes. Disons que cette sortie de crise doit se donner à voir comme une occasion pour nous d'agir ensemble pour remettre la ville durable au cœur du développement de nos pays. Il faut absolument repenser nos manières de développer nos villes et nos territoires. Les élus locaux ont été partout dans le monde au premier plan de la lutte contre la pandémie pour répondre aux besoins immédiats de nos populations et encadrer les actions initiées par nos gouvernements centraux. Et j'ai été à Ouaga particulièrement frappé, comme beaucoup d'entre nous, j'en suis convaincu, de constater la formidable résilience des acteurs locaux, qu'ils soient des entreprises, des communautés locales ou de simples citoyens. Beaucoup ont souhaité participer à leur niveau à la lutte contre le Covid en apportant une solution venant compléter l'action de l'État, qui a parfois semblé insuffisante pour répondre à une crise si inattendue. C'est l'écosystème des villes qui s'est rappelé à tous. Et c'est désormais en intégrant toutes ces énergies existantes à l'échelle locale que nous construirons des solutions sur le long terme. Vous le savez, pour construire les villes durables de demain, l'une des préoccupations majeures des gouvernements nationaux et locaux demeure la question du financement. En effet, pour lutter contre la pandémie, les gouvernements locaux ont augmenté les dépenses publiques et ont vu leurs recettes propres diminuer à raison de la fermeture des activités économiques des différentes villes. Alors que les nations discutent des fonds pour le relèvement, les gouvernements locaux auront besoin et établir l'accès aux ressources afin d'accélérer la mise en œuvre des ODD. Cette question est d'autant plus aiguë dans le contexte de crise économique sans précédent que nous traversons et que nous affectera encore pour plusieurs années. Il est cependant heureux de constater que le monde entier parle de solidarité et de mutualisation des efforts et des moyens pour relancer l'économie et le développement. Mais aussi, en plus de l'aide financière, les gouvernements locaux ont également besoin d'un renforcement de capacité pour développer des ressources humaines et techniques, en particulier dans le domaine des données, afin de suivre et de traiter correctement les impacts de la pandémie à long terme. Nous saisissons cette occasion pour appeler l'ONU et les États membres à renforcer le multilatéralisme, la solidarité, la coopération et l'assistance internationale comme seule réponse appropriée aux crises actuelles et futures. En effet, c'est en engageant un dialogue constructif, mobilisant l'ensemble de l'écosystème de la ville, que nous arriverons à identifier les solutions possibles et adaptées à nos contextes et à nos territoires. C'est par l'échange, le dialogue et la coopération que nous identifierons les mesures d'accompagnement du développement de nos villes, répondant aux besoins de nos territoires et non en appliquant des méthodes préconçues ou venues d'ailleurs. Aussi, je demeure convaincu de la nécessité de co-construire des programmes nationaux d'appui au financement et à l'investissement des villes, au bénéfice des gouvernements locaux, en mobilisant nos ministères sectoriels, les gouvernements locaux, les associations et l'ensemble des partenaires techniques et financiers, permettra de mobiliser rapidement des ressources additionnelles nécessaires dans le long terme pour reconstruire des modèles plus inclusifs et tournés en priorité vers nos populations. C'est ce à quoi les organisations d'autorités locales et régionales discutent actuellement avec plusieurs partenaires financiers et je ne peux que soutenir cette initiative et ce type d'initiative. Je vous remercie de votre aimable attention.
Merci bien, Monsieur le Maire. Ladies and gentlemen, we've now heard from all of our speakers, and I personally have found that they've given a lot of very useful insights. We often hear in all of the public debate around the reaction to COVID, the emergency response, and the recovery, an element of national policy, the need for global cooperation, and far too little attention is being paid to the fact that most of the effective interventions that we have seen have, in fact, been at the local level. And all of our speakers have made very clear that this is something that the local authorities have stepped up to do. They've made a whole range of different types of interventions, often in circumstances where their resource base is severely constrained. And yet they've demonstrated a considerable amount of flexibility in responding to the specific needs of their populations, of their citizens. We heard from the speakers that building back better does not mean building back to what we had before, but building up something different, something that is in truth better, and that the policies have to be both global and local at the same time. The local governments are, of course, indispensable actors in all of this, and they have been able to put forward policies that are adapted themselves to the Sustainable Development Agenda. But we've also seen that the pandemic has revealed structural inequalities, structural fragilities that have highlighted some of the weaknesses of our systems. And that although the local authorities have demonstrated an unexpected capacity to do things differently and to tackle some of these long-standing structural deficiencies, there needs to be a new dialogue, a new form of partnership, a new form of dealing with questions of equity and participation if we are to resolve these fundamental fragilities. And Mr. Wilson pointed to three of them. The economic exclusion that plagues us, the social inequalities that have continued and have deepened, and the ongoing environmental degradation. Putting the response into the local context has highlighted the importance of supporting local business. And two of our speakers mentioned the need for specific support to the small and medium-scale enterprises, not only in the way of financing to enable them to survive and to continue to operate, but in the context of putting in place localized networks, local internet platforms, things that can enable the small and medium-scale enterprise to flourish, to survive and then to flourish, and to be a central part of the recovery. And then Mr. Metzin made what I think is a very important point, and it links back to what was said at the very outset by Ms. Allen, which is that there are a whole range of different interventions, and the local authorities have demonstrated a really unexpected capacity to be innovative and to do what needs to be done to respond to the challenges that their communities face. And that is, he said, that we now have a new normal. We have found that because of the crisis, we've been able to react and to put in place measures that maybe could not have been expected before, but now due to this disruption, we can envisage major change in the way we intervene, major changes, structural shifts in the kinds of policies that we can put in place. And one of those areas is in the rapid deployment of digital technologies, that because we have been forced to restrict our contact with others, we've been able to deploy our digital technologies a great deal more than anyone might have expected. And now we have possibilities like e-government, e-medicine, e-commerce, and online work that open perspectives of different ways of doing things that are more effective and more efficient and also more protective of our people. But one key point here is the need to identify, replicate, and scale up the best practices from our experience and to look forward to that. And I'd like to draw on one last point that was raised by our last speaker, which is that finance is a critical issue. But even more important than that is the multilateral approach, the global support for all countries and all communities in their response to COVID and in their efforts to build back better will in many respects be one of the deciding factors in how well we recover from this crisis and how safely and sustainably we go forward into the future. I think it's been an excellent discussion. I know we had not planned to have an exchange of views with the audience online, and unfortunately we're not set up for that. But Emilia, maybe I can hand it back to you if you would like to share your reactions to the, I thought, very, very insightful points raised by our panelists, and then we can prepare to move on to the next stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have seen several people that would like to briefly intervene. So if that's okay with you, let us give them the floor. I've got the Secretary General of UCLG Africa and the Secretary General of the Commonwealth Local Government Forum. They are both here, have been throughout the session, and I think it would be interesting for us to hear some quick remarks, 3 minutes each, something like that. So if you agree, I would invite them to start. Jean-Pierre, maybe? Microphone, Jean-Pierre.
Sorry for that. It is with great pleasure that I see the quality and the level of people that have been gathered during this webinar. And let me tell you that it's very, very it's very good to see the progress that local authorities has made. I remember 20 years ago, or even more, when we were in Istanbul, begging for a floor, when local authorities were not considered at all as players in the global table, and to see progress that have been made, partly thanks to the COVID, that showed that the local level is the level where you assess the reality of development, you assess the impact of your national policies, you assess the impact of the global agendas. Means that it is very important that this time around, as the president of UCLG said it, bringing the local level, local authorities around the global table is one of the ways the UN, at this moment of their anniversary, will show progress in having consistency with the motto that is put on the definition of the UN universal right, we, the people of the world. So bring the people of the world around the table to be the representatives of the people of the world. The second thing that we learn is that people are not adverse to public authorities. People want a different public authority. People are not averse to the private sector. People want a different type of relation with the private sector. And people want more and more science to direct and inspire public policies, common agendas. And I think it is very critical that through this SDG 17, that is so key, and people, many people emphasizes on this, that is so key for the future of humanity. And based on a renewed solidarity, international solidarity, a renewed multilateralism, bringing together all actors. Based on this, we think the post-COVID has a lot of prospect to build a new era of a more just world, a more resilient world. But this is the challenge, because the forces against that are also very present. But I count on the goodwill and all the capacities of the UN family to work with the local government family so that we keep high the solidarity agenda around the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean-Pierre. You are bringing one of our key recommendations both from our joint statement and from our annual report on towards localization of the SDGs, which is a renewed, stronger multilateral system. Thank you for that. That's also part and parcel of meeting the universal agendas. Greg Munro, the floor is yours. 3 minutes.
Thanks, Emilia, and thanks, Jean-Pierre. My point was fairly similar to Jean-Pierre's. So over the Friday and today, we've heard in all our other webinars, the importance of local government in relation to the COVID responses, and that where local government was involved, the response is better. In the same way, where local government will be involved in the recovery period, it's likely to be a better recovery where it is involved. But we've also seen, and we said it on Friday, the threat to the international system and the shocks that the international system has received with COVID. And we've seen all sorts of things going on in the world, with increased re-centralization, human rights being affected. And we need to re-look at our multilateral system, as Jean-Pierre said. But I want to go back to one of our speakers today. It was Professor Linda Bilmer, when she said that for every $1 spent, every $1 that national government spends locally, the economic development, the magnifying effect is 1.5 to 2 times. And that's stuck in my head. And I want to go back to the HLPF Local and Regional Government Day in 2018, when the Deputy Secretary General, Maimunah Mohammed, said to all of us in the room, it's dawned on her that they need the local government more than local government necessarily needs the UN. And that's another statement that I've never forgotten. So that magnifying effect that Professor Linda spoke about in economics, let's think about it also politically, and about how the multilateral system actually improves the lives of our citizens. So to amplify what Jean-Pierre was saying, the challenge back to the UN system is that the more you include us in the new format as we go into a new world, the more you will have that magnifying effect, and the more that citizens will benefit from the multilateral system by our inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Greg. Is exactly the time where we should have finished, but I want to give Assistant Secretary General Elliot Harris any final remarks, and thank you so much for your moderation.
Thank you very much, Emilia. And I do think that I'm touched in particular by what Jean-Pierre and Greg have just said, is that clearly we do require a multilateral approach, but that multilateral approach must be built on the foundations of local government. And I think if we take that to heart and we realize that what we have multilaterally is only as strong as what we have underneath it as that foundation, then we'll understand that we cannot possibly hope to have any kind of reasonable global approach that ignores what the citizens need on the ground. And no one is better placed to understand what those requirements, those needs are, than those who deal with the citizens on a day-to-day basis, face-to-face. And those are the local governments. Now, of course, there is that fundamental problem of resourcing and of the division of labor between the national, the regional, and the local governments. And that is a major concern in many countries. But I do think that those two fundamental truths are really critical. Without a multilateral approach, we won't be able to deal with this problem or to recover better. But multilateralism is based upon a sort of the healthy local governments underneath. So thank you very much for those insights. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, and thank you for taking up the challenge to be with us and to facilitate this session. We are going now to the closing ceremony, and in this effort to bring multilateralism to this very inclusive system, we are delighted also to count with the presence of the President of the United Nations General Assembly with us this afternoon. Mr. Tijjani Muhammad Bande is with us. We've got quite a good history and a good record as local and regional governments in our relations with the presidents of the General Assembly. They have usually been very open to create a space for our constituency. And we are very pleased to see this tradition go through. We are delighted to count with your presence, Excellency. The floor is yours.
Yes, good morning or afternoon or evening, as the case may be. Honorable Adakalo, Mayor of Barcelona, Honorable Johnny Araya, Mayor of San Jose, Honorable Emilia Saiz, Secretary General of the United Cities and Local Governments, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I thank the United Cities and Local Government Forum for convening today's vital conversation as the world contends with the COVID-19 pandemic and its socio-economic consequences. The scale and severity of the pandemic is being felt in developing and developed countries alike. However, we must focus our response particularly on the 2/3 of the world population at risk of being left behind. We need to focus on specific actions that will alleviate the impact on the well-being and livelihoods of people in developing countries and the marginalized around the world. We need to address their specific needs now while building back better. In order to respond effectively, the Sustainable Development Goals must be at the forefront of the government strategies for recovery to safeguard our communities against future shocks by building resilient systems. For the developing countries, this will require all stakeholders to commit to the Addis Ababa action agenda to ensure adequate financing for development. Furthermore, we will need to combat illicit financial flows which threaten the development of communities everywhere. In other contexts, redistribution, retraining will be key. It's predicted by 2050, 60% of the world population will be urban. In developing countries, the urban population will double and the area covered by cities triple by 2030. With many people projected to live in informal settlements. It's encouraging that 152 countries have adopted national urban policies to promote sustainable urbanization. I urge all member states to emulate this leadership and work to safeguard the future for urban communities. Furthermore, the threat of climate change has not receded. Yet, the development of urban centers concentrated along coastal areas is increasing. The negative effect of climate change is also felt by those living in mountainous areas. Thus, we require climate-resilient urban management and a more concerted effort to utilize culture and innovation. This is not a task for federal or local governments alone. Transformative partnerships with all stakeholders are key to promote people-centered policies and investments for livable cities that provide decent, sustainable jobs, universal access to vital services, including health, education, water, transport, energy, and sanitation. Excellencies, I trust that you will utilize the support available to you, such as the local 2030 toolbox and UNESCO's Culture 2030 indicators. I also encourage the private sector to engage with UN Global Compact local networks. The latter works to facilitate companies to make local connections with other businesses and stakeholders from NGOs, government, and academia, and receive guidance to put their sustainability commitments into action. Excellencies, I commend the 47 countries presenting voluntary national reviews at the high-level political forum under the auspices of ECOSOC this year. These member states have engaged with all stakeholders despite the challenging circumstances in order to prepare for these presentations. I trust that you will give them due consideration, for we each have something to teach and something to learn when it comes to implementing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This is a seminal year for the United Nations as we celebrate the 75th anniversary of our organization, the 25th anniversary of the first World Conference on Women, and we begin the decade of action and deliberate to implement the Sustainable Development Goals. It will, however, be remembered as the year that the world united against the coronavirus to protect the people we serve. The communities around the world, I remind you that we are in this together. The General Assembly stands with you in your fight against COVID-19 pandemic. I urge you to utilize this event to connect with others, to deepen partnerships, and to commit to urgent action to accelerate sustainable development. Clearly, the 2030 Agenda is our best way to safeguard the people we serve. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellency, for those kind words. We are very hopeful indeed that we can actually make a difference, and accepting that our world will never be the same, that we can actually do something more sustainable for future generations. In cooperation of all the spheres of government. We always say it's a whole of government, a whole of society. Thank you very much for that. Allow me now to give the floor to the Secretary General, Special Advisor and Assistant Secretary General of the Climate Action Team, Mr. Selwyn Hart.
Thank you so much, Madam Moderator. And let me at the outset thank the organizers for inviting me to join the third Local and Regional Government Forum. I'm particularly pleased to join the President of the General Assembly, as well as the Mayor of Bogota and the Mayor of Montevideo for this closing session. Colleagues, we are in the midst, undoubtedly, of the most significant challenge local governments and nations have ever faced. And mayors and governors are on the front lines of the pandemic. They're responsible for innovating to provide needed health supplies and services, for implementing shutdown measures that impact lives, businesses, and children, and for designing the economic and business recovery plans that will ensure cities emerge from this crisis as cleaner, safer, and more economically resilient. We have spent today's forum addressing the vital responsibilities of local government, from delivering basic services to financing and collaborating with national government leaders to recover better. I would like to focus my remarks today on recovering better. As the pandemic wreaks havoc in our cities, we are collectively mounting the most robust health and economic response that the world has mounted, and I dare say, since the Industrial Revolution. We have many choices to make about how we lead during this historic moment. Unfortunately, some countries have used stimulus plans as an opportunity to prop up oil and gas companies and coal mines that don't make economic sense, put workers and citizens' health at risk, and ultimately pollute our cities. And some have not placed enough conditionalities, be there social or environmental conditionalities or incentives in place on bailout support to sectors such as shipping, aviation, and industry. While local governments and regional governments may not be writing these stimulus plans, they have immense power to show that there are other options available to countries. As local governments, you have many options to lead, and let me briefly highlight 6 of those options. First, on citizen mobilization. You can lead your voice and mobilize your constituency's voice to call for green recovery packages and national stimulus plans. On transport, secondly, you can redesign public transport systems that make more social distancing and better ventilation systems. And you can ride the electric vehicle wave by investing in EV charging throughout all postcodes. Third, on energy, you can demand that energy that powers your cities is clean and that stimulus plans invest in the much needed transition from the gray to the green. Fourth, on resilience, cities are among the most vulnerable environments to climate impacts, such as water scarcity, drought, and exposure to climate disasters like storms and cyclones. Early investment in climate resilient infrastructure will be absolutely critical. Fifth, on buildings, you can invest and lobby for more funding to invest in energy efficient and high insulated buildings and housing, ensuring positive outcomes for health, economics, and emissions. Finally, on public spaces, you can expand public spaces, widen pedestrian lanes, and close traffic and close streets to traffic. And we've seen some good examples all around the world, from Milan to Bogota and Buenos Aires. These measures make sense for COVID, they make sense for climate action, and they make sense for the physical and mental health of our cities during these trying times. Colleagues, the COVID-19 pandemic has not changed our ultimate objective on climate change: to accelerate the transition to a low carbon and resilient world that limits the increase in global temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The pandemic has only changed the way in which we can meet and will meet our objective. How the economic recovery is designed will be crucial in shaping the long-term pathways for emissions and determining whether the Paris Agreement goals, that goal of 1.5, can be achieved. And how cities recover will serve as models to national governments and global, and as well as global audiences. So the Secretary General, he has proposed these 6 climate positive actions, which I will not get into given that we're short on time, but we really need local and regional governments really to be advocates for the 6 climate positive actions that the Secretary General has proposed. I've already cited some of the powerful examples all over the world, and there are many. We need local and regional governments to steer the way. We need your leadership more than ever. You need to serve as models for a green, inclusive, and resilient recovery from this crisis. I ask you today to partner with the Secretary General on ensuring this. And I look forward to working with all of you, the many local governments, over the coming months and at the UN General Assembly to showcase more models in action. And I thank you for allowing me to speak. And again, I look forward to working with you and all of your teams. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you very much, Special Advisor. I mean, there is no doubt that for our constituency, recovery needs to be green. The future is one that is built on proximity, changing our models of production and consumption, and it is also based in equality. So your inputs are really, really important for our constituency here today. And if you look at our joint statement, you will see many references to this. We really look forward to working with you on those 6 axes that the Secretary General is setting up. Thank you for that. I have been told the COVID crisis is hitting hard again here close to Barcelona. So Mayor Colau, we are not sure whether she will be able to make it or not, but we are trying to be as inclusive as possible. And we have Ambassador Melo from Rio de Janeiro that would like to do a brief intervention. Ambassador, the floor is yours. Ambassador, are you ready? Embajador Melo?
Start my video.
Okay, let's see right now. Okay, it's a great pleasure to be here and to discuss with all of you. You know that EU is doing a lot of effort, as you know, during this hard period of pandemics. We are glad to know that recently launched the fourth report towards the localization of the SDGs and also the useful guidelines for voluntary local reviews. It's always a great opportunity to meet local authorities, to debate the progress achieved towards the plenty localization of the Sustainable Development Goals. I have nothing. Look.
Okay.
And particularly during these challenging times, we are passing through this online format, even being the possible solution to hold this forum. The pandemics enables more cities to participate in the discussion. The COVID-19 pandemic showed the importance of investments in research and development. I should emphasize that Brazil is contributing to the development of the COVID-19 vaccines. One with the Chinese researchers, and this is from São Paulo Butantan Institute, and the other with the Oxford University. And in this case is the Fiocruz Institution from Rio de Janeiro. For the last research effort, the federal government of Brazil is being investing $120 million in this effort. The fiscal and budgetary impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic is our main concern. Cities from developing countries are strongly affected by the pandemic, and mostly they do not have direct access to financial mechanisms. In order to build resilient frameworks, we need to start to think thoroughly about how to get access to financial means. We must advocate for the international organizations and international financial institutions as multilateral banks to provide concessional credit lines for countries that are at the epicenter of the pandemic. And other countries as well that are doing efforts to get rid of these pandemics, to acquire the necessary healthcare supplies to fight the new coronavirus. And not only to fight the new coronavirus, but to recover the economy of our cities. I would like to emphasize that in a globalized economy, investments in economic recovery of the cities benefit all international players. I would say that the international financial institutions should gather to think about clearly how to help cities and their medium and small size companies in order to allow a new kind of development. As tourism is one of the main engines of our economy, you could not fail to pledge that this sector be specifically mentioned.
Thank you, Ambassador. Can you wrap up?
Okay. I would say that tourism is one of the engines of our economy, and I believe that also this sector should be, supported by international financial means. Well, you know that another point that I would like to emphasize is the fact that food security is very important, and Rio has good examples of urban food policies. And we are open to consider cooperating with different countries in food security. You know that we have our green gardens in the
Thank
cities.
you, Ambassador. I am afraid I need to wrap up. So can you finish your sentence and we'll carry on with the closing? We cannot hear you, Ambassador.
I'd like to say that Rio de Janeiro is open to cooperate with different cities, and this is our duty. And I believe that international multilateral financial institutions, international organizations, NGOs should join this effort. But we need to organize concrete programs of work.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. We count on Rio and its efforts to continue contributing to those global agendas. So allow me now to give the floor to the UCLG president, the Mayor Mohamed Boudra, for closing remarks, because given the time, I think we should be closing now. President, the floor is yours.
Merci, Madame la Secrétaire Générale. Je remercie Monsieur Tijjani Muhammad Bande, président de l'Assemblée Générale des Nations Unies, et Monsieur Christian aussi, Monsieur Selwyn Hart. Je reprends ces paroles en nous invitant à assister à l'Assemblée Générale. Nous sommes avec grand plaisir. On se félicite de la réussite du 3e forum. Il est évident qu'il faut consolider ce forum qui fait avancer et fait entendre la voix des collectivités locales et régionales mondiales. On se félicite de cette réussite et je remercie tous les organisateurs et les participants de notre task force, d'ICLE et de tous les maires et les secrétaires généraux et toute la famille de ces élus et des collectivités locales et régionales. Il est évident que maintenant, après la pandémie, il s'agit maintenant d'une reconstruction dans un climat de crise économique. Et cette reconstruction doit être verte et durable. Et c'est pour ça que la voix des collectivités locales, notre vision qui est de proximité, est importante et capitale pour avoir vraiment une reconstruction positive, une reconstruction en évitant les défauts du passé et en insistant sur la solidarité, cette qualité qui a émergé beaucoup durant cette crise. On a vu les citoyens partout dans le monde, comment ils sont solidaires, comment ils se tiennent la main, comment ils s'aident, comment on applaudit à travers les balcons, quand on s'applaudit mutuellement, les personnels de la santé, les fonctionnaires des collectivités, en améliorant les services publics aux citoyens. Cet élan qui est né après la pandémie doit nous mener, nous, les collectivités locales et régionales, à renforcer notre action et avoir plus de contacts et de communication avec les Nations Unies, dont on remercie encore une fois Monsieur le Secrétaire Général, et on voudrait lui transmettre encore, lui rappeler notre demande d'être parmi les membres observateurs de l'Assemblée Générale pour mieux exposer notre point de vue sur tous les aspects des objectifs du développement durable. Et merci beaucoup.
Merci à vous, Monsieur le Président. Well, dear colleagues, we have come to an end of this local and regional forum within the context of the high-level political forum. Our delegation, a large one, continues to have events throughout the week. Please keep an eye on our announcements. I would like to stress the importance of accelerating action and ensuring that we all fill in the action commitments that UN-DESA has opened up. We have made some commitments already. We are working on that, and I know that many of you have filled in these commitments, but it would be very, very useful to have a good map of local action to include even more and more. So we will continue promoting the answer to that call from our colleagues of UN-DESA, and hopefully throughout the year and next year at hopefully a personal high-level political forum where we can all be with each other in New York, be able to present our achievements and to see the difference that we make together. Thank you very much, President of the General Assembly, dear members of the Global Task Force, partners of UNDP, UN Habitat, Local 2030. It's always a pleasure to prepare this with you and to continue our path towards a stronger, more inclusive multilateral system where we achieve our 2030 agenda. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, civil society partners, for being with us today. Have a good rest, keep healthy, and keep enthusiastic, and see you throughout the week. All the best. Bye-bye. Thank you.